You think the worst thing your family can do is forget you. Mine looked me in the eye and told me to sleep in the garage so my successful sister's guests could have real beds. While my parents argued over champagne, they forgot one small detail regarding whose name was actually on the deed to the house. So I stepped outside and made a call I had been avoiding for 3 years. That single call cost my sister her entire picture-perfect engagement. My name is Gianna West. I am 29 years old, and as I stood in the center of my parents' kitchen in Maple Ridge, wearing a faded gray sweatshirt and jeans that had seen better days, I felt less like a daughter returning home and more like a service vendor who had arrived through the back door. The house smelled the way it always did before a big event. It was a suffocating mixture of lemon verbena floor polish, expensive lilies that made my nose itch, and the distinct sharp scent of my mother's anxiety. It was the night before the engagement party, not just any party, but the coronation of my younger sister, Harper. My hands were red and pruny from the water in the sink. The dishwasher was running a full cycle, a low hum that vibrated through the granite countertops. But my mother did not trust the machine with the good crystal. These were the vintage flutes, the ones inherited from a grandmother who had never actually liked us that much, and apparently, they required the gentle touch of a family member who had nothing better to do. So there I was, submerged to my wrists in soapy water, scrubbing away imaginary spots from glass that was already cleaner than my conscience. The lighting in the kitchen was aggressive. My parents had renovated 2 years ago, replacing the warm, forgiving yellow bulbs of my childhood with recessed LED lights that cast everything in a stark, clinical white glare. Under these lights, you could see everything. You could see the slight chip in the subway tile backsplash. You could see the way the skin around my mother's eyes crinkled when she was stressing out. And you could definitely see that I was not wearing makeup, that my hair was pulled back in a messy knot, and that I did not look like the sister of a woman about to marry into a dynasty. I placed a dripping flute onto the drying rack and picked up a lint-free cloth. 150 glasses, that was the count. I had polished 42. From the living room, I could hear my mother, Elaine, holding court on the telephone. She had put it on speaker, a habit she developed when her hearing started to go but refused to admit it, which meant I was a captive audience to her performance. She was talking to Aunt Linda, a woman who measured love in net worth and passive-aggressive compliments. I tried to tune them out, focusing on the squeak of the cloth against the glass, but the acoustics of the house were designed to carry sound, not hide it. "Oh, we are just thrilled," Elaine was saying. Her voice had that pitch, the one that was half octave higher than her normal speaking voice. It was her everything is perfect voice. Tyler is such a wonderful young man. The Grants have been so welcoming. It is going to be a beautiful merger of families. I winced at the word merger. It sounded so transactional. But then again, maybe it was. "And is Gianna there?" Aunt Linda asked. Her voice crackled through the phone's speaker, tinny and sharp. "Is she bringing anyone? Or is she still doing her solo act?" I paused, the glass hovering in my hand. I waited for my mother to defend me. I waited for her to say that I was focused on my career, or that I was independent, or even just that I was happy. "Well, you know Gianna." My mother sighed. The sigh was heavy, laden with a performative disappointment that she had perfected over the last decade. "She is here. She is helping set up. As for work, well, she is currently between opportunities." Between opportunities, the phrase hit me in the chest like a physical blow. It was the polite, suburban code for failure. It was what you said about the nephew who got fired for stealing office supplies, or the cousin who was trying to start a band at 35. It was not what you said about a woman who ran her own specialized analytics firm, even if that firm operated in the shadows of the corporate world, but they did not know about my firm. To them, my silence about my daily grind was evidence of my lack of ambition. "The job market is just so difficult right now," my mother continued, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper that was still loud enough to reach the kitchen, especially for someone with her specific background. "We are just hoping she finds her footing soon. It is hard to watch her struggle while Harper is soaring, but we try to be supportive. I set the glass down. I set it down a little too hard, and the stem made a sharp click against the granite. I took a breath. Specific background, that was her way of saying she did not understand what I did with data, and therefore, it must not be important. I picked up the next glass. 43. The swinging door to the kitchen pushed open, and my father, Richard, walked in. He was wearing his navy blazer, the one with the gold buttons. Even though it was 8 o'clock on a Tuesday night and there was no one here but us, he was in full host mode, practicing his stride, checking the inventory of the wine fridge for the third time in an hour. He looked the part of the patriarch's silver hair, firm jaw, eyes that were constantly scanning the room for imperfections. He stopped when he saw me at the sink. For a second, his face fell. It was a micro-expression, gone in an instant, but I saw it. It was the look of a man who wanted a catering team in crisp white uniforms, but instead got his daughter in a thrift store sweatshirt. "Gianna," he said, recovering with a tight smile. "Good. You are tackling the crystal. Make sure there are no water spots. Tyler's mother has eyes like a hawk." "I know." "Dad," I said, not looking up, "I am using the vinegar solution. No spots." He walked over to the kitchen island, picking up a bottle of wine, a Cabernet that cost more than my first car, and inspecting the label. He turned it over in his hands, admiring the vintage. "Listen," he said, his tone shifting. He sounded casual. Too casual. That was his tell. When he wanted to manipulate me, he always tried to sound like we were just two buddies chatting at a bar. "About tomorrow." "What about tomorrow?" I asked. "Well, there are going to be a lot of people here. Important people. Tyler's father invited his partners from the firm. There is a state senator coming, I think. And obviously, everyone knows Harper is the vice president of strategy at Lakeshore Brandworks." He paused, letting Harper's title hang in the air like a shimmering chandelier. He loved saying it, vice president. It rolled off his tongue with a reverence he usually reserved for scotch. I scrubbed a stubborn smudge on the rim of the glass. "I am happy for her." "Dad, I know you are," he said. "But, look, people are going to ask you what you're doing. It is polite conversation, and we just thought, your mother and I, that it might be better if you kept it simple." I stopped scrubbing. I turned off the faucet. The silence in the kitchen was sudden and heavy. "Simple?" I asked. "Yes," he said, finally looking at me. He looked pained, as if my mediocrity was hurting him physically. "Just tell them you are doing freelance consulting for small businesses. It sounds purposeful. It sounds better than saying you are just picking up odd jobs online. We do not want people to pity you, Gianna. It creates an awkward atmosphere. Freelance consulting. It was a lie wrapped in a euphemism. It was a way to make me sound harmless and employed enough to not be a charity case, but insignificant enough to not threaten Harper's spotlight. I stared at him. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to tell him that the odd jobs I did involved forensic accounting that had dismantled fraudulent charities. I wanted to tell him that my hourly rate was higher than what he made in a week, but I didn't, because in this house, the truth didn't matter unless it came with a title they recognized. "Okay, Dad," I said, my voice flat. "Freelance consulting. Got it." He let out a breath he had been holding, his shoulders dropping an inch. "Thanks, kiddo. It is just for one night. We want Harper to have her moment. She has worked so hard for this." He patted my shoulder 2 quick, awkward taps, and then retreated back to the living room, taking the expensive wine with him. I turned back to the sink. 44. Harper had not come down yet. She was upstairs in the master suite, which she had commandeered for her bridal headquarters, but her presence was everywhere. It was in the stack of seating charts on the counter, color-coded with sticky notes in her sharp, angular handwriting. It was in the endless boxes of decorations stacked by the back door, labeled with strict instructions, "Do not open until Gianna is ready to assemble." I wiped my hands on a towel and walked over to the dining table, where the seating chart was spread out like a battle map. My job tonight, after the glasses, was to handwrite the place cards. Harper had insisted on calligraphy. She had sent me a YouTube tutorial 2 days ago with the caption, "This looks easy. You can figure it out." I looked at the names on the list: CEOs, investors, influencers, people who had founded things, and then, at the very bottom of the hierarchy, table 19, near the kitchen door, me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it, but then the house phone rang again, and my mother's voice floated back in from the other room. She was talking to Uncle Bob now. "Oh, Harper is exhausted," Elaine was saying, her voice brimming with pride. "She has been working 12-hour days at Lakeshore. They just landed that massive automotive account, and she is leading the whole campaign. She is a machine, Bob. I do not know where she gets the energy. She is just a star." I picked up the calligraphy pen. The ink was gold. Harper wanted everything to shimmer, and Gianna Uncle Bob's voice was deep, booming through the speakerphone. "Is she helping out?" "Oh, absolutely," my mother said. Her tone shifted instantly from pride to a patronizing fondness. "You know, Gianna, she is very good with her hands. She is doing all the setup for us. It is good for her to feel useful. Not everyone can be a CEO. Right? Every family needs someone to be the background support." I froze. The pen hovered over a cardstock rectangle. Background support. That was it. That was the summary of my existence in the West family archives. I was not a person with dreams or secrets or a life. I was the stage crew. I was the one who pulled the ropes and swept the floor so the star could shine without tripping over the dust. I looked down at the card I was supposed to write. Tyler Grant. I wrote his name. The lines were shaky at first, but I forced my hand to steady. I had learned to control my tremors years ago. In high-pressure boardrooms, where a single nervous tick could cost you leverage, I could certainly handle a piece of cardstock. I finished the stack of cards around 11 at night. My back ached. My eyes burned from the harsh LED lights. The house was finally quiet. My parents had gone up to bed, presumably to dream of champagne toasts and social climbing. I turned off the kitchen lights, plunging the room into shadow. The only illumination came from the street lamps outside, filtering through the sheer curtains. I walked into the living room, intending to head up to my old bedroom, or at least, the room that used to be mine before it became the guest overflow storage. I stopped at the mantel above the fireplace. This was the shrine. My mother arranged the family photos here with the precision of a museum curator. I stood in the dark, looking at the history of my erasure. There was the photo from our trip to Disney World when I was 10 and Harper was 7. Harper was in the center, sitting on Cinderella's lap, beaming with a missing front tooth. I was standing off to the side, half of my body cut out of the frame because my father had zoomed in too close on Harper. There was the high school graduation photo. Harper was valedictorian. She held her diploma high, looking straight at the camera with a terrifying confidence. I was in the background, out of focus, holding her bouquet of roses because she didn't want to get thorns on her gown. There was the family portrait from last Christmas. Harper and Tyler sat in the middle on the velvet sofa, holding hands, radiant and beautiful. My parents stood behind them, hands on their shoulders, forming a protective, proud circle. And me, I was standing on the far left edge, next to the potted ficus plant. There was a literal gap of 6 inches between my shoulder and my father's arm. I looked like a neighbor who had accidentally wandered into the frame and was too polite to leave. I stared at that gap. 6 inches. It felt like 6 miles. In every single photo. Harper was the sun, and the rest of us were just planets orbiting her gravity. But I wasn't even a planet. I was barely an asteroid. I was space debris. I reached out and touched the glass of the frame. The glass was cold. I had spent my whole life trying to close that gap. I had good grades. I paid for my own college. I built a company from nothing. I bought a house, this house, though they had conveniently forgotten how the down payment was structured when my grandmother's trust executed. I had done everything right. But looking at these photos, I realized something that made my stomach turn over. It didn't matter what I did. To Richard and Elaine West, I would never be the main character. I was just the girl who cleaned the glasses. I was the girl who needed to lie about her job to save them from embarrassment. I was the background. A floorboard creaked above me. Harper was awake. I could hear her footsteps pacing back and forth in the master bedroom. Click, clack, click, clack. She was probably practicing her surprised face for tomorrow, or rehearsing the speech she would give about how blessed she was. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the picture frame. My face was ghostly, superimposed over the image of my sister's triumph. "Enjoy the bed, Harper," I whispered to the empty room. I turned away from the mantel and headed toward the stairs. I didn't know it yet, but that 6-inch gap in the photograph was about to become the widest canyon in the world. And tomorrow, I was going to stop trying to bridge it. I was going to blow the bridge up. I walked past the kitchen, past the 150 gleaming glasses, and started the long climb upstairs. I needed to sleep. I had a garage to move into in the morning. The morning arrived with the subtlety of a car crash. I had barely finished my coffee when the front door swung open, and the atmosphere in the kitchen shifted from tense to suffocating. Harper had arrived. She did not just walk into a room, she colonized it. The first thing that hit me was the sound of her heels striking the hardwood floor. A sharp, rhythmic clack, clack, clack that sounded like gunfire. The second thing was the smell. She was wearing a perfume that reeked of white gardenias and money, a scent so heavy it seemed to displace the oxygen in the room. She swept into the kitchen in a whirlwind of beige cashmere and silk. Her hair was blown out to a terrifying perfection, bouncing with every step, and on her finger sat a diamond that was less a piece of jewelry and more a small geological event. Trailing behind her was Tyler Grant. If Harper was the storm, Tyler was the weatherman who smiled while predicting a hurricane. He was handsome in that generic, manufactured way, perfect teeth, perfect tan, wearing a polo shirt that probably cost $200. He had the kind of face that politicians bought for their sons to keep them out of jail. Gianna Harper shrieked. It was not a greeting, it was an accusation. She stopped in front of me, her eyes raking over my outfit. I was wearing a clean pair of jeans and a gray t-shirt, sensible clothes for a morning spent moving furniture. Harper looked at me like I was wearing a trash bag. "You are still wearing that?" she asked, her nose wrinkling slightly. "I thought Mom said you were going to elevate the look for the weekend. You look like you are about to paint a fence. Hello to you too." "Harper," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I am helping Mom with the catering setup. I did not think a ball gown was required for carrying boxes." Harper let out a short, sharp laugh. She turned to Tyler, placing a manicured hand on his chest. "See what I mean? She is so committed to that thrift store aesthetic, it is almost brave." Tyler smiled, a tight, polite expression that did not reach his eyes. "Good morning, Gianna. Good to see you helping out." The way he said helping out made it sound like community service. Harper leaned in closer, lowering her voice, though not enough to actually be private. "Are you sure you are clean enough to be handling the hors d'oeuvres later, I mean? Really, Gianna, we have investors coming. People with standards. Just try not to look like you live in a library basement." "Okay." Before I could respond, my mother bustled in from the dining room, clapping her hands together like a frantic seal. "Okay, everyone. Family meeting in the dining room. We have a crisis with the sleeping arrangements." I followed them into the dining room, feeling the familiar knot of dread tighten in my stomach. My father was already there, pacing in front of the window, looking at a clipboard. The dining table was covered in floor plans and guest lists. "Here is the situation," my father said, not looking up. "The heating unit in the guest cottage is acting up. It is freezing out there. We cannot put the Grants in there. It would be an insult." "Of course not." My mother gasped. Tyler's parents must have the master guest suite. That was always the plan. "Right," my father said. "But now we are down 2 beds because the cottage is uninhabitable. We have Harper's college roommate, Jessica, coming in from New York, and we have Aunt Linda and her husband." He looked up, his eyes scanning the room, landing briefly on everyone before settling on the wall behind me. "So, we have to shuffle," he said. Harper sighed, dropping into a chair and checking her nails. "Well, Jessica cannot stay at a hotel. She is the maid of honor. She needs to be here for the morning prep. She needs a real room with a mirror and good lighting. My mother nodded vigorously. Absolutely. We cannot have the maid of honor getting ready in a Motel 6. The room went silent. I looked around. There were 4 bedrooms in the main house. My parents' room, the master guest suite for the Grants, Harper's old room, which she was currently occupying as her bridal suite, and my old room. My old room was small, but it had a bed. It was currently being used as overflow storage for extra chairs, but it was habitable. My mother cleared her throat. She refused to look me in the eye. She looked at her hands, then at the tablecloth, then at Harper. Gianna. She started, her voice taking on that sickly sweet tone she used when she was about to ask for something unreasonable. We were thinking, since Jessica is a guest, and she traveled all the way from the city, maybe she could take your room. I blinked. My room. Yes, my mother said, rushing the words now. It is just for 2 nights, just until the party is over. We can clear out the chairs, put fresh sheets on the bed. It has the best light for makeup, other than the master. I felt a coldness spread through my chest. Okay, if Jessica takes my room, where am I sleeping? The silence returned. It was heavier this time. My father suddenly found the crown molding on the ceiling fascinating. Tyler checked his watch. Well, my mother said, her voice dropping to a whisper, we have the air mattress, and the garage is heated. It is actually quite warm in there since your father insulated the walls last winter. The garage. I stared at her. I waited for the punchline. I waited for someone to laugh and say, just kidding. But no one laughed. They were all studying the floor, or their phones, or the wall. You want me to sleep in the garage? I asked. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, hollow and distant, like a dog. Oh, stop it, Harper snapped. Her patience had evaporated. Do not be dramatic. Gianna, it is a finished garage. It has a floor. It is practically a studio apartment. She smirked then, a cruel little tilt of her lips. Actually, it is bigger than that shoebox you rent in the city. Consider it an upgrade. You should be thanking us for the extra square footage. A ripple of laughter went around the table. My mother giggled nervously. Even Tyler let out a short, distinctive chuckle. It was not a joke. It was a dismissal. I looked at my father. Dad, he sighed, finally looking at me. His face was tight with annoyance. Gianna, please, do not make this difficult. It is a logistics issue. We have guests, important guests. We cannot ask Tyler's family or the bridal party to sleep on the floor. You are family. You are the one who is supposed to sacrifice for the team. I am the one who owns the house. I wanted to scream. I am the one who paid for the roof you are standing under. But I could not say it. Not yet. The legal trust was specific about the timing of the reveal. And if I blew it now, I risked the entire leverage I had built. So you are giving my childhood bedroom to a stranger I have never met, I said slowly, measuring every word. And I am going to be sleeping next to the lawnmower and the recycling bins. Elaine, my mother, waved her hand dismissively. Oh, the lawnmower is in the shed now. It is just the extra refrigerator and your father's car. It is perfectly clean. You are used to, roughing it. You have always been the bohemian one. Bohemian. That was another code word. It meant poor. This is ridiculous, I said, standing up. My hands were shaking, and I pressed them flat against the table to steady them. I am 30 years old. I am not sleeping in a garage at my sister's engagement party. Harper stood up too. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. This is not about you. Gianna, she shouted. Her face flushed pink. Why do you always have to make everything about you? This is my weekend. This is my engagement. Tyler and I have people coming who can change our careers. I need everything to be perfect. I need Jessica happy. I need the house to look perfect. I cannot have you cluttering up the guest hallway with your vibe. My vibe. I asked. Yes, your vibe. You look like a depressed librarian. It brings the energy down. Just sleep in the garage and stop being selfish for one single weekend. She turned to our father. Dad, tell her. Richard West straightened his blazer. He looked at me with cold, hard eyes. The eyes of a man who was tired of dealing with a defective product. Gianna, he said firmly. That is enough. We are not having a scene. You will sleep in the garage. It is decided. If you cannot handle that, then maybe you should not be here at all. The threat hung in the air. Get in line or get out. I looked at them. My mother, looking anxious but relieved that the decision was made. Harper, glowing with the triumph of getting her way. Tyler, looking bored. My father, the enforcer. They looked like a portrait of a happy family, protecting their happiness from the intruder. Me. Fine, I said. I pulled my hands off the table. Fine, I will move my stuff. I turned and walked out of the dining room. I could hear the collective exhale behind me. I heard Harper say, God, she is so exhausting. And my mother murmur, I know, honey, I know. But she is doing it. I went upstairs, packed my small duffel bag, and carried it down the back stairs. I walked through the kitchen, past the catering prep area, and opened the heavy fire door that led to the garage. The smell hit me instantly. It did not smell like a studio apartment. It smelled like gasoline, cold concrete, and old cardboard. The air was stale and chilly. Despite my mother's claims about the insulation, I walked down the 3 concrete steps. The garage was a 2-car space, but one side was dominated by my father's pride and joy, a vintage Mustang he spent more time polishing than driving. The other side was filled with metal shelving units stacked with holiday decorations, old paint cans, and boxes of tax returns from 1998. In the narrow strip of space between the Mustang and the wall of shelves, my father had set up a queen-sized air mattress. It was inflated. Sitting directly on the concrete floor, a pile of mismatched sheets and a thin wool blanket were thrown on top of it. The refrigerator in the corner, the one they used for beer and soda, hummed loudly, then kicked into a rattling gear that sounded like a dying animal. Rrr, chunk. Rrr, chunk. I dropped my bag onto the mattress. It made a pathetic plastic squeak. I sat down on the edge of the bed. The cold from the concrete seeped through the plastic and the denim of my jeans instantly. I looked around. A spiderweb stretched between the bumper of the Mustang and a shelf holding antifreeze. This was my place. This was where I belonged in their world. Not at the table, not in a bedroom. Here, with the toxic chemicals and the things they only looked at once a year, the door at the top of the stairs opened again. A slice of warm, golden light from the kitchen cut across the dark garage floor. Harper stood in the doorway. She was holding a glass of wine now. She did not come down the steps. She stayed on the landing, looking down at me like a queen surveying a dungeon. Are you settled? She asked. I did not look up. I am sitting on a balloon on a cement floor. Harper, I am as settled as I am going to get. Great, she said, ignoring the sarcasm. Listen, I need you to be up by 6 tomorrow morning. 6, I asked. Yes, the florists are coming at 7. But before that, I need you to wipe down the floor in there. She gestured vaguely at the space around me. Why, I asked. Because people are going to be walking through the garage, she said. Dad wants to show off the Mustang to Tyler's dad. He is a car guy, so they are going to come in here to look at it. I do not want them seeing dust bunnies or your dirty clothes scattered everywhere. So, keep it like a showroom. Okay. She took a sip of her wine. And maybe hide the air mattress under the car or something when you wake up. We do not want it to look like a refugee camp. She smiled then. It was a terrifying smile. It was the smile of someone who had won everything and still wanted to take the last coin in your pocket just to see if she could sleep tight. Gee, the door clicked shut. The lock engaged with a solid thud. I was alone in the dark, lit only by the green glow of the freezer temperature display. The refrigerator rattled again. Rrr, chunk. I laid back on the air mattress. I stared up at the automatic garage door opener hanging from the ceiling. They wanted me to be invisible. They wanted me to be the help. They wanted me to sleep in the garage so they could pretend they were the kind of people who didn't have a daughter who struggled. But they had made a mistake. They thought pushing me down here was an act of dominance. They thought they were putting me in my place. But what they didn't realize was that the garage was quiet. The garage was private. And in the garage, I could make a phone call without anyone hearing me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The screen was bright in the darkness. I scrolled past my mother's contact. I scrolled past Harper. I stopped at a name I had not dialed in 3 years. A name that belonged to a world my family didn't even know existed. A world where I wasn't a failure. A world where I was the one holding the gavel. My thumb hovered over the call button. Harper wanted a showroom fine. I would give her a show. I pressed the button and lifted the phone to my ear. The ringtone buzzed, long and low, echoing the rattling of the fridge. Rrrr, chunk. It was time to wake up. The air inside the garage was stale, recycling the ghosts of exhaust fumes and old paint. So I stepped out into the driveway. The night was cold, typical for this time of year in Maple Ridge, with a bite that seeped through my thin sweatshirt. I leaned back against the hood of my car, a sensible, 4-year-old sedan that my mother constantly suggested I trade in for something more consistent with the family image, and looked up at the house. It was glowing. Every window was ablaze with warm, inviting light. I could see silhouettes moving behind the shades in the living room, probably my parents toasting to their own generosity. Upstairs, the window of my old bedroom was lit up too. I saw a shadow pass across it, Jessica, the maid of honor, unpacking her suitcase in the space that was supposed to be mine. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The screen was the only source of light out here in the exile of the driveway. My thumb hovered over the Contacts app. I scrolled. Most people's phones are filled with names like Mom, Dad, Pizza Place, or Dr. Smith. Mine had those too, buried deep, but the recent calls list told a different story, a story written in a language my family did not speak. Rowan Pierce, Kendall, Ortiz, AG Task Force, Secure Line. These were names that carried weight. These were names that, if uttered in the right boardrooms in Chicago or New York, made people straighten their ties and check their compliance reports. To my family, they were invisible. To my family, I was just Gianna, the girl who was between things, the girl who needed to be hidden away in a garage so I wouldn't ruin the aesthetic. I hesitated. My finger hovered over Rowan's name. Calling him was not just making a phone call. It was pulling a trigger. It was crossing a line that I had carefully drawn in the sand 3 years ago. I had drawn that line to protect them. I had spent 36 months being the buffer, the silent guardian who swallowed insults and deflected inquiries so that Richard and Elaine West could sleep soundly in their illusion of suburban perfection. But tonight, they had put me in the garage. Tonight, they had looked me in the eye and told me that my comfort, my dignity, and my place in this family were worth less than a stranger's opinion of their guest room. I pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice. I expected voicemail. It was late, almost 10 o'clock, but on the third ring, the line clicked open. There was no groggy hello, no confusion. The voice on the other end was crisp, alert, and terrifyingly calm. I was wondering how long you would let them do this to you. Gianna, Rowan Pierce. He did not waste time with pleasantries. He was the kind of lawyer who billed in 6-minute increments and made every second count. I took a deep breath, the cold air filling my lungs. It tasted like burning leaves and finalized decisions. Move it up, I said. My voice was steady, surprisingly so. I thought I would be shaking, but I wasn't. I was cold. Solid stone. There was a pause on the other end. A shuffle of papers. A keyboard clicking. Move up the timeline, Rowan asked. We were scheduled for the end of the fiscal quarter. That gives the transition team time to know. I interrupted. If we are going to enforce the trust and release the report, tomorrow night is as good as any. The silence that followed was heavy. Rowan was processing the logistics, the legal ramifications, the sheer scorched earth magnitude of what I was asking. Gianna, he said, his tone shifting from professional to cautionary. You understand what this means. If we execute the transfer notification and the compliance filing tomorrow, during the party it is not going to be quiet. We are talking about process servers. We are talking about state investigators. He paused, letting the weight of it settle. This will not just embarrass Harper. This will detonate her night. It could trigger an immediate freeze on the family assets pending the investigation. Your parents, they are going to be blindsided. It is the nuclear option. I looked up at the house again. I saw Harper's silhouette in the master bedroom window. She was probably laughing. She was probably telling Tyler how relieved she was that the problem had been moved to the garage. I thought about the last 3 years. I remembered the nights I sat in my small apartment, poring over spreadsheets until my eyes bled, tracking shell companies and illicit transfers. I remembered the video calls I took from my car in their driveway during holidays, turning off the camera so my client's federal investigators wouldn't see my mother walking by in the background asking if I was still playing on the computer. I remembered the way I had quietly paid off the liens on this house when my father's investments went south, masking the payments so he thought it was just a banking error in his favor. I remembered intercepting the audit letters. I remembered fixing their messes, silently, invisibly, while they patted me on the head and told me to be more like Harper. I've spent 3 years cushioning the blow. Rowan, I said into the phone, I have spent 3 years eating their scraps and cleaning up their spills. Tonight, they put me in the garage next to a lawnmower. I gripped the phone tighter. I am done. Rowan exhaled. A short, sharp sound. Understood. I will call Kendall. We will have the packet ready. I can have a courier there by tomorrow evening. Do you want me to come personally? Yes. I said, bring the full file. And bring the notary. Consider it done. See you tomorrow. Director West. The line went dead. Director West. It was the first time anyone had called me by my title in days. It felt like oxygen. I lowered the phone and stared at the screen. Notifications started rolling in immediately. A cascade of automated confirmations triggered by Rowan's keystrokes. Title transfer packet ready for signature. AG office confirmation received. Priority flag. Case 8922B. Active. Asset verification complete. The words glowed white against the black screen. To anyone else, they were administrative jargon. To me, they were ammunition. I put the phone back in my pocket and wrapped my arms around myself. The cold was seeping in now. But I didn't care. My mind drifted back. I wasn't always this cold. I remembered being 22. Fresh out of college. Sitting at the kitchen table with my grandmother. Nana Rose. Before the dementia took the sharp edges of her mind. She was the only one who saw it. The only one who didn't look at Harper's pageant smiles and see the future. She had grabbed my wrist one afternoon. Her grip surprisingly strong, her eyes clear as gin. You have a mind like a steel trap. Gianna, she had whispered, looking at the spreadsheet I was helping her balance for her garden club. Don't let them turn you into a doormat just because you don't sparkle like a cheap rhinestone. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. Just know what you are protecting, and when the time comes, you protect what is right. She knew, even then, she knew that this family had a rot in it, a tendency to value the shine over the substance. That was why she had set up the trust the way she did. That was why she had given the keys to the kingdom to the granddaughter who knew how to count the cost, not the one who just wanted to spend it. I looked up at the window of my old room again. The light went out. Jessica must be going to sleep, sleeping in my bed, under the roof that, as of the email I just received, legally belonged to me. A bitter laugh escaped my lips, turning into a cloud of steam in the night air. They thought I was in the garage because I had nowhere else to go. They thought I was between opportunities. They thought I was harmless. I walked back toward the garage door. The motion sensor light flickered on, bathing the driveway in a harsh, interrogating glare. I opened the side door and stepped back into the gloom. The smell of gasoline was still there, sharp and cloying. The air mattress looked pathetic on the concrete floor, a sad little island of blankets in a sea of oil stains and indifference. I sat down on the edge of the mattress. I didn't cry. I had cried enough over this family. I had cried when they forgot my 25th birthday because Harper had a callback for a commercial. I had cried when my father told his golf buddies I was figuring things out, when I had just been promoted to senior analyst. I was done crying. I lay back, pulling the thin wool blanket up to my chin. I stared at the ceiling of the garage, at the exposed rafters and the cobwebs dancing in the draft. Tomorrow night, the string lights would be on. The champagne would be flowing. Harper would be in her white dress, clinging to Tyler, the man she thought was her ticket to a golden life. My parents would be beaming, telling everyone how blessed they were, and then I would introduce them to the real world. I closed my eyes. The hum of the refrigerator was rhythmic, almost soothing now. It sounded like a countdown. My sister told me to sleep in the garage for her engagement party, so I made a call. They just didn't know yet what that call meant. My alarm clock was not a gentle chime or the morning sun streaming through a window. It was the mechanical screech of a chain-drive motor dragging a heavy metal door upward. I shot up from the air mattress, heart hammering against my ribs, just as the garage door rolled all the way up to the ceiling. The sudden flood of natural light was blinding. I blinked, disoriented, clutching the thin wool blanket to my chest as the cool morning air rushed in, swirling with the dust I had kicked up during the night. Standing in the driveway, staring at me with a mixture of confusion and mild disgust, was a team of 3 men in matching green polo shirts holding floral arrangements. Behind them stood my father, holding his coffee mug like a scepter. "Morning," Dad said. He did not look at me. He looked at the space where the air mattress was sitting, which was apparently blocking the path to the backyard. "We need to get the florists through. Harper wants the archway set up before the caterers arrive at 10. One of the florists shifted his weight, looking at my bedhead and the wrinkled t-shirt I had slept in. "Sorry, miss," he mumbled, averting his eyes. I scrambled off the mattress. I felt less like a human being and more like an infestation that had been discovered in the basement. "I am moving," I said, my voice raspy from sleep and the dry garage air. "Just give me a second." I shoved the blankets into a pile and kicked the deflated corner of the mattress toward the wall of shelves. My father watched me with impatience, tapping his foot against the asphalt. "Hurry up, Gianna," he said, taking a sip of his coffee. "You know how tight the schedule is. And try to get showered before the Grants get here. We do not want you looking like this." He waved his hand at my general existence. I grabbed my toiletry bag and sprinted toward the side door, ducking past the florists who were already marching in with buckets of white hydrangeas. As I brushed past them, I caught the scent of gasoline clinging to my hair. It was going to take a lot of shampoo to get the smell of my father's Mustang out of my pores. I did not even get to finish brushing my teeth before the summoning began. "Gianna." My mother's voice shrieked from downstairs. "Gianna, the cake is here." I spat out the toothpaste, rinsed my face with freezing cold water because the hot water heater took 5 minutes to reach the second floor, and pulled my hair into a tight, severe bun. I threw on a black dress, simple, nondescript, something that said, "I am here to work, not to party," and ran downstairs. The kitchen was a war zone. There were boxes of pastries everywhere, ribbons covering the island, and a terrifying amount of glitter. Check the tiered cake for cracks. My mother barked the moment I walked in. She did not look at me. She was aggressively fluffing a napkin. "Then I need you to go to the backyard and hang the backdrop. The wind keeps blowing it over. And for heaven's sake, put on some lipstick. You look washed out. We want to look vibrant. Gianna, vibrant." I walked over to the cake. It was a monstrosity of fondant and ego, towering 3 feet high. I inspected it. It was perfect. Of course it was. Harper would not have accepted anything less. I grabbed the roll of double-sided tape and headed for the sliding glass door. As I passed the dining table, I saw the stickers. Sheets and sheets of gold foil circles printed with elegant black font. "Harper and Tyler, a forever kind of love." "Stick these on the favor boxes after you do the backdrop," my mother added, "and make sure they are centered. Harper will measure them." I paused. "You want me to sticker 300 boxes?" My mother finally looked at me. Her eyes were wide and manic. "Yes, unless you have a better idea of how to contribute. It is not like you chipped in for the catering bill." "Gianna." The comment was a small, sharp needle. I bit the inside of my cheek. No, I had not chipped in for the catering. I had only paid the property taxes on this house for the last 3 years so they would not be evicted. But sure, I would sticker the boxes. I spent the next 2 hours battling the wind in the backyard, wrestling a vinyl backdrop that read, "She said yes," into submission. By the time the first cars started pulling into the driveway, my fingers were sticky with adhesive and my back was throbbing. The Grants arrived in a convoy of luxury SUVs. Tyler was driving the lead car, looking effortlessly handsome in a linen suit. Harper was in the passenger seat, already laughing at something, her head thrown back in a pose that looked rehearsed for the paparazzi that did not exist. But it was Tyler's mother, Monica Grant, who commanded the atmosphere. She stepped out of the back seat of the second car, a woman made entirely of sharp angles and expensive skincare. She wore a silk dress that probably cost more than my entire student loan balance. She swept into the backyard, bypassing the actual hosts to inspect the floral arrangements. I was standing near the beverage station, arranging lemons in a water dispenser, trying to look invisible. It did not work. "Oh, there she is," Monica said, spotting me. She walked over, her heels sinking slightly into the grass. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my plain black dress and my unadorned hands. "You are Gianna, right, the sister?" "Yes, Mrs. Grant," I said, forcing a smile. "Good to see you again." Monica tilted her head. "You too. You have been so helpful. I hear Harper says you are practically running the logistics today." I opened my mouth to speak, to say that I was actually just following orders, but she continued, "And what is it you do again?" "Dear, I know Harper is the VP at Lakeshore, and Tyler is obviously running the foundation, but I can never remember your field. Is it teaching?" Before I could get a single syllable out. Harper appeared at my elbow. She looped her arm through Monica's, flashing a dazzling, high-wattage smile. "Oh, Monica, do not bore yourself with the details," Harper said, her voice dripping with a sickly sweetness. "Gianna is exploring her options right now. She is taking a little break from the corporate world to find herself. She helps out here mostly, keeping Mom and Dad organized." She patted my arm. It felt like a condescending pet. "We are just glad she has the time to pitch in." "Right." "Gee." I felt the heat rise up my neck. "I do not just help out," I started to say. "I consult for O. Harper," interrupted loudly, pointing at a vase on the table. "Are those the hydrangeas we ordered, Monica? Look at the color. It matches your dress perfectly." Monica's attention snapped away from me instantly. "Oh, they are divine. You have such an eye." "Harper." They walked away, arm in arm, discussing the color palette. I was left standing by the lemon water, the word consult dying on my lips. It became the theme of the afternoon. As more relatives and family friends trickled in, the backyard filled with the buzz of conversation. I was moving through the crowd with a tray of empty glasses because apparently the hired servers were overwhelmed and I needed to jump in when I was cornered by Uncle Bob. Gianna Bob boomed, clapping a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Long time no see. How is life in the big city? Or wait, are you back here now? Your mom said something about you floating around. I am not floating." "Bob," I said, gripping the tray, "I run a data analytics firm that specializes in—" "Hey." Bob Tyler's voice cut through the air. He appeared with a bottle of champagne. "You have to try this vintage. My dad had it flown in from the vineyard this morning." Bob's eyes lit up. "No kidding, the reserve label." He turned his back on me completely. "Sorry. Gianna, we will catch up later. Gotta taste the good stuff." I stood there, watching the bubbles rise in the glass Tyler poured. Tyler glanced at me, gave a quick, dismissive wink, and turned back to Bob. It happened again with my cousin Sarah. "So, are you dating anyone?" Sarah asked, picking at a fruit skewer. "Or are you focusing on whatever it is you are doing? I am focusing on my business." I said, Right, Sarah said, scanning the crowd for someone more interesting. "Aunt Elaine said you are taking some time to figure things out. That is brave. I would panic if I did not have a paycheck coming in every 2 weeks." "I have a paycheck," I said, my voice tightening. "I have clients." "Oh, totally," Sarah said, already waving at someone across the lawn. "Freelancing is cool, very flexible." "Oh my God. Is that Logan?" She abandoned me to run toward a young man in an ill-fitting suit who had just walked onto the patio. Logan, my second cousin. He had graduated from college 3 weeks ago. I watched as my father rushed over to Logan, shaking his hand vigorously. "Look at this guy," my father announced to the group standing nearby. "Fresh out of State University and already landed a junior associate role at the bank. Full benefits, 401k, the works." A chorus of approval went up from the aunts and uncles. "That is how you do it," someone shouted. My father put his arm around Logan's shoulders and steered him toward me. "Gianna, say hi to Logan. Maybe he can give you some tips on how to fix up a resume. He clearly knows what interviewers are looking for." The humiliation was a physical thing. It felt like a stone in my throat. Logan looked at me with wide, innocent eyes. He was 22. He had acne scars and a tie that was too long. "Hi, Gianna," Logan said earnestly. "I heard things are kinda tough for you right now. If you want, I can send you the link to the recruiter I used. They place temps too." He was not trying to be mean. He was just repeating what he had been told. He had been told that his older cousin was a failure, a cautionary tale, a person who needed help finding a temp job. I looked at Logan. I looked at my father, who was beaming at this boy as if he were the son he never had. "Congratulations, Logan," I said. My voice was calm. It scared me a little how calm it was. "That is a great starting salary. Make sure you max out the employer match on that retirement plan. It is free money." Logan blinked, surprised by the specific advice. "Oh, yeah, thanks. I will." My father clapped Logan on the back again. "Smart kid. Come on, let me introduce you to Tyler. You two talk business." They walked away, leaving me holding a tray of dirty napkins. I walked back toward the kitchen, my heels sinking into the soft earth. I needed a moment. I needed to breathe air that didn't smell like hypocrisy. I ducked into the pantry, a small, narrow closet off the kitchen where we kept the dry goods. It was dark and smelled of onions and spices. I leaned against the shelving unit and pulled out my phone. The screen lit up. One new email, from Pierce Ortiz, Private Counsel. Subject: execution of Clause 14B. Confirmation of receipt. I opened it. Director West. "This is to confirm that the notification of irregular inheritance activation has been electronically delivered to the primary email addresses of Mr. and Mrs. Richard West as of 4:30 in the afternoon today. Hard copies are with the courier. Per your instruction, we are proceeding with the assumption of immediate enforcement. I will be arriving at the property at 8:30 in the evening with the notary to collect your final signature on the occupancy addendum. The state investigator has confirmed his separate arrival time. Hold the line. Regards, Rowan." I stared at the timestamp. 4:30. My parents had received the email over an hour ago, but they hadn't checked it. Of course they hadn't. My father was too busy showing off the vintage Mustang to Tyler's dad, and my mother was too busy micromanaging the placement of the cocktail napkins. They were so absorbed in the performance of their lives that they missed the notification that the stage was being sold out from under them. I marked the email as read and slipped the phone back into my pocket. I could have walked out there. I could have pulled my father aside and told him to check his inbox. I could have warned Harper that her fiancé was about to be scrutinized by a man with a badge. But I stayed in the pantry. I looked at a box of pasta on the shelf. I reached out and straightened it, aligning the edge perfectly with the shelf. They wanted me to be the help. Fine. I would be the help. I would help them dig this hole so deep they would never climb out of it. I pushed the pantry door open and walked back into the kitchen. Harper was standing by the counter, holding a glass of champagne, surrounded by her bridesmaids. They were all laughing. A flock of birds in pastel chiffon. "This house is just perfect for this," one of the bridesmaids squealed. "You are so lucky your parents have this space." Harper took a sip of her drink, looking around the kitchen with a possessive glint in her eye. "I know. Right," she said. "I mean, it needs some updates. If this place was actually in my name, I would totally gut this kitchen. And I would build a proper storage room off the back. Maybe dig out a basement under the garage so we would not have to look at all of Dad's junk." She laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. "I would make sure there was no room for clutter. I hate clutter." I was standing right behind her, lighting the last set of votive candles on the warming tray. She knew I was there. She was talking about me. I was the clutter. I was the junk in the garage that she wanted to bury in a basement. I struck a match. The flame flared up, bright and hot. I touched it to the wick of the candle. Good thing it doesn't belong to you, I thought, watching the flame dance. I blew out the match. A thin wisp of gray smoke curled up into the air, disappearing into the ventilation system. More ice. Gianna Harper called out without turning around. The bucket is getting watery. On it, I said. I walked toward the freezer, my steps light, my head high. I grabbed the ice scoop. The cold air from the freezer hit my face, refreshing and sharp. Let them have their champagne. Let them have their toasts. The clock was ticking, and unlike them, I knew exactly when the alarm was going to go off. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, and the backyard underwent a transformation that was nothing short of cinematic. The stark, honest light of day was replaced by the warm, forgiving glow of 2,000 fairy lights strung between the oak trees. My father had spent $400 on those lights, hiring a crew to drape them just so, creating a canopy of artificial starlight that made everything look expensive and dreamlike. Under this canopy, the guests looked beautiful. They were a sea of cocktail dresses and tailored suits, moving in a synchronized dance of social posturing. The air buzzed with the clinking of crystal glasses I had washed by hand and the low, rhythmic thrum of jazz covers playing from the expensive sound system near the pool. It was the kind of party that would look perfect on social media. Every angle was curated. Every moment was staged. I stood near the catering tent, holding a tablet that contained the run of show. I scanned the schedule. 7 o'clock cocktail hour. 8 o'clock, welcome toast by Tyler. 8:15, father of the bride speech. 8:30 slideshow. 9 o'clock dancing. I read the list 3 times. My name was nowhere on it. I was not giving a toast. I was not introducing anyone. I was not even listed under the generic family acknowledgments. I was simply part of the infrastructure, as essential and invisible as the extension cords running through the grass. I adjusted the strap of my plain black dress and stepped out of the shadows of the tent. I had a job to do. I had to circulate. I had to make sure the champagne flutes were full and the empty skewers were cleared away. As I moved through the crowd, I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. I passed a group of Harper's colleagues from Lakeshore Brandworks. They were young, loud, and shiny, holding their drinks with a casual entitlement. This venue is intimate. One of them was saying, "It feels very grounded. I like that Harper kept it at her parents' house. It shows she is connected to her roots." I reached in to take an empty napkin from the edge of their high-top table. "Excuse me," I murmured. They didn't stop talking. They just shifted slightly to let me pass, their eyes gliding over me without registering recognition. I was just a hand clearing away their trash. Suddenly, the music lowered. The DJ, a guy named Kyle who was charging my father $1,500 for 4 hours of work, tapped his microphone. "All right, everyone. If I could get your attention, the man of the hour would like to say a few words." The crowd shifted, turning toward the stone patio where Tyler was standing. He looked like the golden boy of a romance novel, backlit by the pool lights, holding a microphone in one hand and Harper's hand in the other. Harper was beaming. She looked radiant. I had to admit, happiness, even if it was based on a foundation of lies, looked good on her. Tyler cleared his throat. He had that easy, practiced charisma that made you want to trust him, even if you knew better. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice smooth and projecting easily to the back of the yard. "It means the world to us to have our favorite people here. You know, when I first met Harper, I thought she was too good to be true. She was smart, she was driven, and she had this incredible energy that just lit up the room." The crowd murmured their agreement. Awe and nods rippled through the garden. "She is the hardest working person I know," Tyler continued, squeezing her hand. "She has built a career that most people dream of, and she did it all before 30. Coming from a family like the Wests, I can see where she gets it. Richard, Elaine, you raised a powerhouse. My parents, standing in the front row, preened. My father puffed out his chest. My mother dabbed at a dry eye. But," Tyler said, his tone shifting slightly, becoming more jocular, more, just folks. We all know every family has to have balance, right? You cannot have two alphas in the same house, he chuckled, and the crowd chuckled with him. Anticipating the punchline, I mean, look at Gianna. He pointed the microphone vaguely in my direction. I was standing near the buffet, holding a stack of dirty plates. The spotlight of attention swung toward me, heavy and blinding. Gianna is the free spirit of the clan, Tyler said, grinning. While Harper was climbing the corporate ladder, Gianna was well. She was taking the scenic route. And hey, we love her for it. Someone has to keep life interesting, right? Someone has to remind us that not everyone needs a career plan or a steady paycheck to be happy. The crowd laughed. It was a warm, indulgent laugh. They thought he was being charming. They thought he was celebrating my quirkiness. I stood frozen, the china plates heavy in my hands. The scenic route, that was a new one. Harper leaned into the microphone, her voice bubbling with laughter. Oh my God. Ty, don't roast her too hard, she said. But she was smiling. Though, to be fair, Gianna did hold the record for most jobs attempted in a single year. Remember the year you tried to be a pottery instructor and then a dog walker? And then what was it? Something with essential oils. She looked at the crowd, inviting them in on the joke. She is just still exploring, Harper chirped, and we are so proud of her for trying. The laughter was louder this time. It wasn't mean-spirited, exactly. It was worse. It was pitying. It was the sound of successful people looking down at the village idiot and patting her on the head. I forced the corners of my mouth up. It felt like I was stretching rubber. I nodded, playing the part. The goofy sister, the flake, the one who couldn't stick to anything. They didn't know that the pottery instructor phase was a cover while I audited a money laundering ring that was using an arts collective as a front. They didn't know the dog walking was surveillance on a CEO who was faking a disability claim. I let them laugh. When the speech ended and the applause died down, I retreated to the beverage station, my heart hammering a cold, hard rhythm against my ribs. I barely had time to set the plates down before a group of Harper's friends descended on the bar. One of them, a girl named Madison who wore a dress that looked like spun sugar, turned to me. That was so funny what Tyler said. Madison giggled. I love that you are so chill about it. So, are you really just floating right now? That sounds so relaxing. I am so burned out at the agency. I looked at her. I decided to try, just once, to drop a breadcrumb of truth. I am not really floating, I said quietly. I work with data and risk assessment. I run my own firm. Madison blinked. Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes glazed over. Oh, like data, she asked. Yes, I said. I analyze patterns to predict financial collapse or identify fraud. Madison stared at me for a beat, and then her face lit up with a completely wrong understanding. Oh my God. Wait, like patterns, like astrology. Excuse me, I asked. Risk assessment, she squealed. Turning to her friend, Brittany, listen, Gianna does, intuitive readings. That is so cool. It is all about data points in the stars, right? Predicting when things go wrong. I opened my mouth to correct her. I wanted to say, no, I analyze ledger entries and bank transfers. But Brittany was already nodding enthusiastically. That makes so much sense. That is why you are so quiet. You're observing the vibes. That is so valid. I totally get anxiety about the future, too. They smiled at me. Two beautiful, vacuous faces, and then grabbed their vodka sodas and drifted away to the dance floor. I stood there, stunned. I had just told them I hunted financial predators, and they thought I read horoscopes. It is sweet, isn't it? I turned. Monica Grant was standing next to me. She was holding a glass of Chardonnay and looking at me with that same terrifyingly perfect smile she had worn all day. Next to her was my mother. Elaine, what is sweet? I asked. Monica gestured with her glass toward the girls walking away. That you can connect with Harper's friends, even if you are in such different places in life. She turned to my mother. Elaine, you really are a saint, Monica said, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Most families would not be so accommodating. letting an adult child live at home, and helping out with the catering. It is good that you give her a sense of purpose. At least she feels useful tonight. My mother sighed, a long, suffering sound. We do what we can. Monica, Gianna has a good heart. She just struggles to find her footing. But yes, having her help tonight has been a blessing. It saves us the cost of another coordinator. I stood there, listening to them discuss me as if I were a rescue dog they had graciously decided not to euthanize. Useful. That was the highest praise I could hope for. I felt a vibration in my pocket. I slipped my hand into my dress and pulled out my phone, shielding the screen with my body. Message from Rowan, arriving in 30 minutes. We are reviewing the final addendum in the car. Message from AG. Contact en route. 2 units. Low profile until we make contact with the target. 30 minutes. I put the phone back. The anger that had been simmering in my gut all day began to cool into something harder, something sharp. Dad walked up then, breathless and flushed with wine. He had heard the tail end of Monica's comment. Now, he said, putting a heavy arm around my shoulders. He squeezed me tight, rocking me slightly. Let us not sell Gianna short. She is steady. She is simple. He beamed at Monica, thinking he was paying me a compliment. Not everyone needs to be a tiger like Harper. Right, Gianna? She is happy with the little things. A quiet life, no ambition to conquer the world, and that is okay. The world needs Indians, not just chiefs. Right, simple. The word hung in the air between us. My father, the man whose gambling debts I had quietly restructured 2 years ago so he wouldn't lose his pension, was calling me simple. I looked at him. I looked at the man who was currently standing on property that I owned, drinking wine that I had technically paid for, insulting my intelligence to impress a woman whose son was running a Ponzi scheme. You are right, Dad, I said. My voice was soft. I am very simple. I just like things to be clear. Exactly, he boomed, slapping my shoulder. Clear, simple. That is my girl. Just then, the photographer waved from the center of the lawn. Family photo time. Everyone, West family and Grant family, come to the archway. The crowd parted. My parents rushed forward. Harper and Tyler were already posing, looking like a magazine cover. Monica and her husband, Greg, stepped in on the other side. I walked toward them. I assumed I would stand on the end, as usual, but as I approached the group, Harper looked up. Her smile faltered just a fraction. Oh, actually, she said, her voice bright and commanding. Can we just do immediate family and parents first? For the press release? She looked at me. Gee, do you mind grabbing my phone and taking a behind-the-scenes shot while the photographer works? We can get you in the big group shot later. The lighting is just tricky right now with so many people. It was a lie. The lighting was fine. She just didn't want me in the frame. She didn't want the unemployed sister in the plain black dress ruining the aesthetic of her power couple launch. I stopped. I looked at the 6 of them. My parents, the Grants, Harper and Tyler. They stood shoulder to shoulder, a unified front of success and wealth. Sure, I said. I took Harper's phone. I stepped back. I stepped back out of the light, into the shadows of the oak trees. I held up the phone, on the screen. They looked perfect. They were smiling so hard it looked painful. 1, 2, 3. I called out. I took the photo. As I lowered the phone, I checked my watch. 8:25, 5 minutes. The music changed. The DJ transitioned from upbeat jazz to a slow, sentimental ballad, At Last by Etta James. It was the signal for the first dance, or at least a pre-dance sway for the happy couple. My mother hurried over to me, looking frazzled. Gianna, she hissed, the red wine at the main bar is running low. Tyler's father drinks that expensive Merlot. There are 2 more cases in the garage. In the garage, I asked. Yes, next to where you are sleeping. Go get them. Now. We cannot run out during the speeches. She shoved me toward the house. I turned and walked away from the party. I walked away from the lights, the music, and the laughter. I walked into the shadow of the house, down the driveway, toward the garage. The air out here was quiet. The bass of the music thumping against the walls of the house sounded like a distant heartbeat. I reached the garage door keypad and punched in the code. The door rumbled open, revealing the dark cavern where my air mattress sat waiting for me. I walked in and found the cases of wine. They were heavy. I grabbed the first box, gritting my teeth against the weight. As I stepped back out onto the driveway, hefting the box of Merlot that cost more than my weekly grocery budget, I heard a sound. It was the sound of tires crunching on asphalt. I stopped. 3 black sedans turned onto our street. They were not luxury SUVs. They were American-made, government-issue sedans with tinted windows and no hubcaps. They moved with a silent, predatory purpose. They did not park in the driveway. They stopped at the curb, blocking the entrance. The doors opened in unison. Thud, thud, thud. Figures stepped out into the street lamp's glow. First, Rowan Pierce. He looked impeccable in a charcoal suit, holding a thick leather folio. He looked up, scanned the driveway, and locked eyes with me. He nodded once, a sharp, almost imperceptible dip of his chin. Then, the others. 2 men and a woman in windbreakers that said, "State Investigator" in yellow letters on the back. They weren't hiding. They were putting on their lanyards. I stood there in the driveway, holding the box of wine. The contrast was perfect. Me, the servant, holding the alcohol for the party, them, the executioners, holding the warrants. I set the box of wine down on the pavement. I wouldn't be needing it. Rowan walked up the driveway, his shoes clicking on the concrete. He stopped 5 feet away from me. "Director West," he said. His voice was calm, professional, and loud enough to be heard over the distant music. "We are ready to proceed. The notary is in the second car." I smoothed down the front of my black dress. I wasn't the girl in the garage anymore. "Let's go inside." "Rowan," I said, "I think they are just about to start the speeches." I turned back toward the house. The fairy lights were still twinkling. The music was still playing. My family was still smiling. But the show was over. The real performance was about to begin. I set the heavy box of Merlot down on the foyer floor with a thud that echoed slightly against the marble tile. My arms were trembling, not just from the weight of the bottles, but from the adrenaline that was now coursing through my veins like ice water. Outside, the bass of the music was still thumping, a steady, oblivious heartbeat of a party that was already dead on arrival. I was just straightening up, wiping the dust from the cardboard box onto my black dress, when the doorbell rang. It was not a polite, social ring. It was a long, insistent press that cut through the noise of the jazz band playing in the backyard. My father, Richard, came bustling out of the living room, a half-empty glass of wine in his hand. He looked flushed and annoyed, checking his watch. "Who on earth is arriving this late?" he muttered, adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror. "The speeches are about to start. If this is another one of Harper's college friends who cannot tell time, I am sending them straight to the back gate." He pulled the door open with a practiced, welcoming smile that dropped instantly when he saw who was standing on the porch. It was not a college student. It was Rowan Pierce. Rowan did not look like a party guest. He was wearing a charcoal 3-piece suit that cost more than my father's car. He held a leather briefcase in one hand and a manila folder in the other. Behind him, standing in the shadows of the porch light, was a woman I recognized as a notary public, clutching her heavy stamp bag. "Can I help you?" my father asked, his voice losing its jovial host quality. "We are in the middle of a private event." Rowan stepped forward, crossing the threshold without waiting for an invitation. He had a presence that sucked the air out of the room, calm, precise, and dangerous. "Mr. Richard West?" Rowan asked. "Yes," my father said, puffing up his chest slightly. "I am the owner. If this is about the noise ordinance, I can assure you we have a permit from the city. For I am not here about the noise." "Mr. West," Rowan interrupted smoothly. "I am Rowan Pierce, legal counsel for the Rose West Trust. I need to speak with the current occupants regarding the immediate enforcement of the property title." My father blinked. The Rose West Trust. That was settled years ago. My mother passed 3 years ago. Everything was transferred to me. Rowan did not smile. He simply held up the folder. Actually, it was not. It was held in a conditional trust pending specific beneficiary requirements. Those requirements were met and verified as of yesterday evening. I need to speak with you, your wife, and the other primary residents in a quiet room, now. My father looked at me, bewildered. I stood by the box of wine, my face impassive. Gianna, go get your mother, he snapped, his voice tight with panic. And get Harper. Tell them it is a legal matter. I did not move to obey him like a servant this time. I walked to the back door, signaled my mother and Harper, and then followed them all into the formal dining room. Tyler tagged along, looking bored and slightly irritated that his spotlight moment was being delayed. The dining room was quiet. The table was set with the overflow gifts that hadn't fit on the display table outside. It was the same room where, just 12 hours ago, they had exiled me to the garage. Rowan set his briefcase on the table, right next to a silver toaster oven someone had bought for Harper. The notary stood silently by the china cabinet. "What is this about?" Harper demanded, crossing her arms. Her white dress rustled aggressively. "We have 200 people waiting for us. Can't this wait until Monday, number Mrs. Hale to be? It cannot," Rowan said. He opened the folder. 3 years ago, Rose West established a revocable living trust for this property. Rowan began, his voice clear and monotone. The terms were specific. While Richard and Elaine West were granted right of residency, the actual title of the home, the deed itself, was to transfer to the female grandchild who demonstrated, and I quote, "fiscal solvency, protective management of the asset, and a commitment to the family legacy." My mother laughed nervously. "Well, that is obviously Harper. She is the vice president at Lakeshore. She is the success story." Rowan ignored her. He pulled out a document filled with dense legal text. The trust stipulated a trigger clause. He continued, "The title would transfer automatically once the designated heir paid off the outstanding liens on the property totaling $142,000 and maintained the property taxes for 36 consecutive months." My father went pale. The color drained from his face so fast, it looked like a magic trick. "Liens," he whispered. I thought the bank error." "There was no bank error, Mr. West," Rowan said. "The liens you incurred from your speculative investments 5 years ago were quietly paid off. The property taxes have been paid in full every quarter, not by you, and not by Harper." Rowan slid a piece of paper across the polished mahogany table. It was a receipt, a final confirmation of payment. Dated yesterday. The payments were made by Gianna West. Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. Everyone turned to look at me. I was standing near the doorway, leaning against the frame. I didn't say a word. I just looked back at them. "That is impossible." Harper scoffed, breaking the silence. "Gianna. She is unemployed. She is broke. She sleeps in the garage. For God's sake." She pointed at me, her finger shaking slightly. "She is doing odd jobs online. How could she pay off $100,000? This is a joke, right, Gianna? Did you hire this guy? Is this some sick prank because you are jealous?" Tyler laughed, a harsh barking sound. "That has to be it. Look at him. He is an actor. This is pathetic. Gianna, you hired a fake lawyer to ruin the party." Rowan did not look at Tyler. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a heavy document with a raised seal. It was the deed. "This is the certified deed. Recorded with the county clerk at 9 o'clock this morning," Rowan said. "And here is the signature of Rose West on the original trust documents." He pushed the papers toward my father. Richard West looked down. He saw his mother's signature, the shaky but distinct script of Nana Rose. He saw the dates. He saw the financial records attached, showing wire transfers from Lantern Line Analytics, my company, paying his debts for 3 years. You paid it," my father stammered, looking at me with eyes that were suddenly terrified. "The gambling debts. The second mortgage," I nodded. "I did not want you to lose the house." "Dad, Nana knew you were in trouble. She set up the trust so I could save it without humiliating you. But why are you doing this now?" my mother cried out, clutching her pearls. "Why tonight?" "We are in the middle of the engagement party," Rowan answered for me. "Because, Mrs. West, You violated the two primary conditions of the residency clause. He held up two fingers. Violation 1. Commercial exploitation of the asset. You accepted a payment of $25,000 from the Grant family to use this property as a venue, which you disguised as a gift to avoid taxes. That reclassifies this home as a commercial entity without the owner's permission. He looked at Tyler. Tyler shifted uncomfortably, his arrogance flickering. Violation 2, Rowan said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming colder. Adverse possession and mistreatment of the primary beneficiary. The trust states that the heir must have unimpeded access to the primary dwelling. By forcing the legal owner of this home to sleep in an unheated garage to accommodate a guest, you breached the occupancy agreement. Harper's mouth fell open. Wait, you mean because we put her in the garage? Because you treated the owner of this estate like a squatter, Rowan corrected. He turned to my father. Director West sent you an email at 4:30 this afternoon, notifying you of the trust enforcement. If you had bothered to check your inbox instead of posing for photos, you would have known that as of 5 o'clock today, this house belongs to Gianna West. You are guests here, and right now, you are unauthorized guests holding an unauthorized commercial event. My mother let out a sob. She looked at the walls of the dining room as if they were dissolving around her. This is my house, she whimpered. I picked out this wallpaper. I raised my children here. It was your house, Elaine. I said. I finally stepped away from the door and walked to the table. My voice was calm. I wasn't shouting. I wasn't crying. I was just stating facts. It was your house until Dad betted against a futures market he didn't understand. It was your house until you almost lost it to foreclosure 3 years ago. I bought it back. I have been paying for every light bulb, every shingle, and every blade of grass for 3 years. I looked at Harper, and I did it silently because I didn't want to embarrass you. I let you play the successful daughter. I let you pretend I was the failure. But last night, you looked me in the eye and told me to sleep next to the lawnmower. Harper's face was a mask of red-hot fury and humiliation. You are a manipulative little you planned this. You wanted to ruin my night. I did not plan to sleep in the garage. Harper, I shot back. You planned that. I just made a phone call. Tyler stepped forward, trying to use his physical size to intimidate Rowan. Listen, buddy. I do not care what papers you have. We have a party going on. You cannot just kick us out. My father is out there. The senator is out there. Rowan didn't flinch. Actually, Mr. Grant, I have the sheriff's department on speed dial. Technically, you are trespassing. Tyler froze. The mention of the sheriff, combined with the presence of a legitimate attorney, finally pierced his bubble of entitlement. My father slumped into a chair. He looked old. Suddenly, he looked very, very old. So what now, he whispered. Are you kicking us out? Are you putting us on the street? I looked at them. My parents, terrified and small. Harper, furious and trembling. Tyler, calculating his next move. They expected me to be cruel. They expected me to be like them. I am not evicting anyone, I said. My mother looked up, hope flaring in her eyes. This is still your home. Mom, Dad, I am not a monster. I am not going to throw my parents out on the street. I signaled to Rowan. He pulled a second document from his folder. This is an occupancy addendum, Rowan explained. It grants Richard and Elaine West a lifetime right of residency. You can live here for the rest of your lives, rent-free, provided you pay for your own utilities and groceries. He slid the paper toward them. However, he added, there is a caveat. I walked over and placed my hand on the table, right on top of the deed. I am the owner. I said, that means I make the decisions about the property. No more events without my permission. No more renting it out to Tyler's family for tax breaks. And absolutely no more telling me where I can and cannot sleep in my own house. I looked at Harper. And if you want this party to continue, if you want to walk back out there and cut that cake without the sheriff escorting your guests off the lawn, you are going to acknowledge that. Harper stared at me. She looked like she was choking. To acknowledge me as the owner was to acknowledge that her entire narrative, the successful sister versus the loser sister, was a lie. It was to admit that she was partying on my charity, But she had no choice. The music from outside drifted in a cheerful, upbeat pop song that sounded grotesque in the tension of the room. "Fine," Harper hissed. "Fine. Just sign the paper." "Dad." My father picked up the pen. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely hold it. He signed his name. My mother signed hers, weeping softly as she did so. Rowan took the document, handed it to the notary, who stamped it with a loud, final thunk. "Congratulations," Rowan said, closing his briefcase. "The residency is secured. The title remains with Director West." He looked at me. "Is there anything else?" "Gianna." I looked at my family. The power dynamic in the room had shifted so violently that I could almost hear the air cracking. They weren't looking at me with pity anymore. They were looking at me with fear. "One more thing," I said. I looked at Harper. "Nobody sleeps in the garage tonight, not even the staff." I turned and walked toward the door. "Where are you going?" my mother called out, her voice trembling. I paused. "I have another meeting," I said, "and you have a party to finish. Try to enjoy it. I own the electricity, so I will make sure the lights stay on for you." I walked out of the dining room, leaving them sitting in the wreckage of their assumptions. But as I stepped back into the hallway, I knew the night wasn't over. The real estate was just the beginning. The real storm was just pulling into the driveway. The ink on the residency addendum was barely dry when the front door opened again. This time, there was no doorbell. Just the heavy, authoritative thud of knuckles against wood followed immediately by the latch turning. Rowan Pierce stepped aside. His job done, making way for the two people I had been expecting all night. They didn't look like lawyers. They looked like exhaustion wrapped in cheap suits. The woman, Kendall Ortiz, wore a beige trench coat that had seen better days and shoes with thick rubber soles, the kind you wear when you spend 12 hours a day knocking on doors in bad neighborhoods. The man with her, Detective Miller, was broader, silent, with a badge clipped visibly to his belt next to a holstered weapon that seemed to suck the remaining oxygen out of the hallway. They walked in with the casual confidence of people who had the law on their side. "Excuse us," Kendall said, her voice raspy but projecting clearly into the dining room where my family was still processing the fact that they were guests in my house. "We are looking for Tyler Grant and Gregory Grant." My mother, Elaine, let out a small, strangled squeak. She looked toward the front window, terrified that the neighbors might see police officers standing in her foyer. "Please," she whispered, clutching her chest. "Not so loud. The door is open. People will hear." Harper, still reeling from the revelation about the house, tried to salvage the situation. She stepped forward, her face a mask of forced confusion. She put a hand on Tyler's arm, a protective gesture that looked pathetic given who was standing in front of us. "I am sure this is just a misunderstanding," Harper said, her voice high and brittle. "Tyler runs a charity, a scholarship foundation. There must be some administrative mix-up. Are you here about a permit?" Kendall didn't even look at Harper. She looked straight at Tyler. "Tyler Grant," she asked. Tyler straightened his spine. He was good at this, the act of being untouchable. "Yes, I am Tyler Grant, and this is a private event. If you want to speak to me, you can call my office on Monday." Kendall reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded document. It wasn't a ticket. It was thick, stapled, and stamped with the seal of the State Attorney General's office. "This isn't a social call." "Mr. Grant?" Kendall said, handing him the papers. "This is a notice of inquiry and a subpoena for immediate deposition regarding the financial activities of Grant Future Pathways. We also have a warrant to seize electronic devices belonging to you and your father, Gregory Grant, as part of an ongoing investigation into predatory lending and fraud." Tyler took the papers. His hands, usually so steady when holding a champagne flute, trembled, just a little, a subtle vibration that rattled the paper. Fraud Greg Grant, Tyler's father, stepped out from behind his son. He was red-faced, smelling of expensive scotch. "Now see here, we help underprivileged kids go to college. We are a non-profit." Kendall smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a hunter who had just closed the trap. "We know what you say you are, Mr. Grant," she said, "but according to the forensic audit we just concluded, Grant Future Pathways isn't a scholarship fund. It is a high-interest loan sharking operation targeting 18-year-olds with no credit history, disguised as educational aid." I stood in the hallway, leaning against the wall, watching the color drain from Harper's face. She didn't know. That was the tragic part. Harper thought she was marrying a philanthropist. She thought the trips to St. Bart's and the diamond on her finger came from the goodness of his heart and the success of his investments. She didn't know about the students, but I did. I let my mind drift back, just for a second, to the work I had been doing for the last 8 months. It had started with a single case file at Lantern Line Analytics. A young girl from a community college in Ohio had reached out to a consumer protection group I consulted for. She had borrowed $5,000 from a charity called Grant Future Pathways to pay for textbooks and a laptop. The contract she signed was 30 pages long, filled with jargon designed to confuse anyone without a law degree. Buried on page 22 was a clause that converted the grant into a loan with a 40% interest rate if the student failed to maintain a perfect 4.0 grade point average. And Tyler's company made sure they failed. They had partnerships with predatory online course providers that were designed to be impossible to ace. I had spent nights tracking the money. I traced the interest payments from desperate students into shell companies. I traced those shell companies to offshore accounts. And finally, I traced the offshore accounts back to a domestic holding company that paid for Tyler's Porsche, Greg's country club membership, and the engagement ring currently sitting on my sister's finger. Last night, when I stood in the driveway and made that call, I hadn't just called Rowan about the house, I had called Kendall. "You wanted a place where all your key targets are in the same zip code at the same hour," I had asked her. "You are welcome." Back in the dining room, the silence was deafening. Tyler was reading the document, his eyes darting back and forth. "This is ridiculous," Tyler stammered. "These are standard lending practices. We have lawyers, and we have victims." Kendall cut in. "Hundreds of them." She turned to Harper. "Ms. West, or is it Miss Hale?" Harper blinked, looking like a deer caught in headlights. It is West. For now. We need to ask you a few questions as well," Kendall said. Harper recoiled. "Me? I have nothing to do with the foundation. I work in advertising." Kendall checked a notebook. "We have records of 3 wire transfers from a joint checking account in your name and Tyler Grant's name, totaling $45,000, moving into the operational fund for the foundation. We need to verify if you were a knowing participant in the laundering of these funds, or if your account was used as a pass-through without your consent." The room seemed to tilt on its axis. Harper grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. "Launder, no. Tyler told me he said those were tax write-offs. He said we were donating to the cause." Tyler closed his eyes. He knew it was over. He knew that the moment they started pulling on the thread of Harper's involvement, the whole sweater would unravel. "We can discuss this in private," Kendall said, gesturing toward the living room. "Unless you want to have this conversation in front of your wedding guests." Greg Grant was already moving toward the living room, looking like a man marching to the gallows. Tyler followed him, dragging his feet. Harper stood frozen. She looked at Tyler, then at her parents, and finally, her eyes found me in the hallway. I hadn't said a word. I hadn't gloated. I hadn't pulled a gotcha moment. I just stood there, the quiet observer of the demolition. "Go, Harper," I said softly. "Go answer their questions." She walked past me like a zombie. As she passed, I smelled her perfume gardenias and fear. The door to the living room closed, but the walls of my parents' house were thin. We could hear the muffled sounds of Kendall's questions and the rising, panicked voices of the Grants. My mother sank onto a dining chair, burying her face in her hands. "This cannot be happening," she sobbed. "The neighbors, the reputation, what will people think, even now, as her daughter was being questioned by state investigators and her future son-in-law was being unmasked as a fraudster. Her biggest fear was what Mrs. Johnson next door would think." My father was pacing. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the screen. "I should check the news," he muttered. If this is real, if this is a state investigation, he didn't have to search hard. A few seconds later, my cousin Logan, the one with the new job at the bank, the one my father had praised as the future of the family, poked his head into the dining room. He looked pale, Uncle Richard Logan said, holding up his phone. "You might want to see this." My father grabbed the phone. I stepped closer. Looking over his shoulder, it was a local news alert. Breaking State Attorney General launches massive crackdown on predatory student lending, raid underway, at offices of Grant Future Pathways. The article didn't mention Tyler by name yet, but it listed the company, it listed the allegations, it described the scheme in brutal detail, exploiting the dreams of low-income students to fund a lavish lifestyle. My father dropped the phone onto the table. It landed with a heavy clatter. He looked at me. His eyes were wide, filled with a sudden, dawning realization. "You knew," he whispered. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The door to the living room opened. Tyler stepped out. He looked different now. The charm was gone. The arrogance was gone. He looked like a cornered rat. He saw me standing there. "You did this," he hissed, striding toward me. "You brought them here." My father stepped between us, but Tyler pushed past him. He got right in my face, close enough that I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. "You couldn't just be happy for your sister. Could you?" Tyler spat. "You had to ruin everything. You brought the government into a family home. Who does that? What kind of sister does that?" I didn't back down. I didn't flinch. I looked him dead in the eye. And for the first time all night, I let the anger show. Not the hot, screaming anger of a victim, but the cold, hard anger of a judge. "You brought vulnerable kids into your business model." "Tyler," I said. My voice was low, steady, and clear. "You built your fortune on the backs of teenagers who just wanted an education. You ruined their credit. You ruined their futures. You drove them into bankruptcy before they could even legally buy a drink." I took a step forward, forcing him to step back. "The moment you did that," I said, "it stopped being just family. It became evidence." Tyler opened his mouth to argue, but Detective Miller stepped out of the living room. "Mr. Grant," Miller said, his voice deep and bored, "we are not done. Get back in here." Tyler looked at me one last time with pure hatred, then turned and slunk back into the room. I walked out the back door, into the cool night air. The party was still going on, but the energy had shifted. People were checking their phones. I could see the glow of screens illuminating faces in the darkness. The news was spreading. I walked to the edge of the patio, away from the crowd, into the darkness near the hydrangeas I had helped arrange. I needed air. A few minutes later, the sliding glass door opened. Harper stepped out. She looked like she had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Her mascara was untouched. She hadn't cried yet, but her skin was the color of old paper. She wasn't wearing her engagement ring. Her left hand was bare, clutching her right arm as if she were cold. She walked over to where I was standing. She didn't look at the party. She didn't look at the guests. She looked at the ground. "How long?" she asked. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. I turned to look at her. "How long have you known?" she repeated, looking up at me. I looked at my sister, the golden child, the one who had everything I was supposed to want. "Long enough," I said. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. A crack appeared in her voice. "Why didn't you warn me? You let me plan this party. You let me put on this dress. You let me stand up there and tell everyone how wonderful he was." I took a breath. The smell of gardenias was overwhelming. "I tried." "Harper," I said gently, "remember Thanksgiving? When I asked you if you had looked into the foundation's tax returns, you told me I was jealous and to stop being a buzzkill." Harper flinched. "Remember Christmas?" I continued. "When I tried to tell you about the consumer complaints I saw online, you told me that successful people always have haters and that I wouldn't understand because I didn't have a business." I looked out at the party guests, oblivious and happy, drinking wine paid for by stolen money. I gave you chances. Harper, I gave you so many chances to ask a single question, to look at a single document, but you didn't want to know. You wanted the fairy tale. Harper stared at me. Her eyes filled with tears. Finally, "So you decided to humiliate me instead," she whispered. "No," I said. "I decided to stop protecting you from the truth, because if I had told you in private, you would have talked yourself out of it. Tyler would have spun a story, and you would have believed him because you wanted to believe him." I gestured toward the living room where the police were waiting. "You can't talk your way out of a subpoena." Harper. She looked at me for a long time. It was a strange look. It wasn't hatred. It was confusion. She was looking at me and realizing that the sister she had shoved into a garage, the sister she had mocked for being between things, was the one holding the axe that had just chopped down her beanstalk, long enough to give him chances to fix it, I said, finishing my thought, and long enough to know he never would. Harper let out a long, shaky breath. She looked down at her bare hand, then she looked back at the house, where her fiancé was currently negotiating his surrender to the state authorities. She didn't scream. She didn't yell. She just nodded. A small, jerky movement. "I need a drink," she said. "Not champagne." I said, "No." She agreed. "Not champagne." She turned and walked back toward the house, but she didn't go to the party. She went toward the kitchen door, avoiding the guests, walking past the "Just Engaged" sign that was now mocking her with its gold foil cheer. I stayed in the garden, listening to the murmurs of the crowd growing louder as the rumors spread, watching the fairy lights twinkle above a celebration that had just become a crime scene, the backyard, once a carefully curated ecosystem of jazz and polite laughter, had dissolved into a low-grade panic. It was not a stampede, nothing so dramatic. It was the quiet, scurrying panic of people who realized they were standing too close to a burning building. The DJ, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure, had lowered the volume until the music was just a rhythmic thud, like a failing heartbeat. Guests were clustering in tight circles, heads bent together, phones glowing in the twilight. I saw a few of Tyler's business partners slip out the side gate, loosening their ties as they speed-walked toward their cars. Near the dessert table, a skirmish was breaking out. Monica Grant was cornering my mother. Her face, usually a mask of Botoxed serenity, was twisted into something ugly. "Your daughter," Monica hissed, her voice carrying over the dying music, "has brought law enforcement into my son's engagement party. Do you have any idea the damage this will do? We have investors here. We have the press." My mother, Elaine, looked like she was shrinking inside her dress. "Monica, please. We had no idea. We thought she was just helping with the flowers. We didn't know she was capable of what?" "Telling the truth." Monica snapped. "You people are toxic. I knew we should have vetted this family better." My father, spotting the altercation, grabbed my mother's arm and then grabbed mine. His grip was hard, fueled by shame and confusion. "Kitchen," he muttered. "Now." He dragged us into the kitchen, away from the prying eyes of the guests. The room was a mess of half-eaten appetizers and empty wine bottles. The air smelled of stale champagne and disaster. He released my arm and spun around to face me. My mother leaned against the counter, fanning herself with a cocktail napkin. "What have you done?" my father demanded. His voice was shaking. "Who are those people?" "Gianna." "How do you know? State investigators." "Did you look them up online? Did you call a tip line?" He was looking at me, but he wasn't seeing me. He was seeing the unemployed daughter who spent too much time on the internet. He assumed this was some clumsy, desperate act of a person with nothing better to do. "You are destroying your sister's life," my mother wailed. "Do you realize that, even if this is all a mistake, the rumors alone will kill her career? Why would you do this?" I leaned back against the island, right next to the 3-tiered cake that no one was going to eat. I was tired, not physical tired, but soul tired. I didn't call a tip line. "Dad," I said, "I filed a formal forensic report." My father blinked. "A what?" I took a breath. It was time. No more euphemisms, no more consulting. 3 years ago, I left the firm in Chicago. I began, "You remember, You told everyone I was burned out. You told everyone I couldn't handle the pressure. I remember you quit a six-figure job to move back here and do nothing." My father spat. "I didn't quit because of pressure." I said, my voice steady, "I quit because they asked me to overlook a risk compliance issue for a pharmaceutical client that was hurting people. I signed a non-disclosure agreement, took my severance, and I started my own company." My mother looked up, her eyes red. "Company? What company?" "You sit in your room all day. It is called Lantern Line Analytics." I said. The name meant nothing to them. I saw the blank stare. "It is a boutique firm," I explained. "Just me and 3 contractors. We specialize in forensic accounting and risk assessment for nonprofits, consumer protection groups, and sometimes the state. We don't advertise. We don't have a flashy office. We work under non-disclosure agreements because the people we investigate are usually powerful and litigious." My father scoffed. "So you are a private eye. I am a data analyst." "Dad," I corrected, "I track money. I look for patterns that don't make sense, like a scholarship fund that takes in $2 million in donations, but only disperses $50,000 in actual aid while spending $1.5 million on administrative costs and travel." I watched the realization hit him. It was slow, like a heavy door closing. "You investigated Tyler," he whispered. "I investigated a tip I received 8 months ago from a student housing advocacy group." I said, "The name on the file was Grant Future Pathways." I didn't target him because of Harper. I targeted the company because they were charging 18-year-olds 40% interest on textbook loans. My mother stood up. "But you are home all the time. You are always here. You drive that old car." "I work remotely, Mom, and I drive that car because I put every dollar of profit back into the business or into this house." I gestured to the ceiling. "Those trips I took last year. When you told Aunt Linda I was finding myself in Darcy, I was presenting evidence to a congressional subcommittee on student loan fraud." My parents looked at each other. They looked terrified. They were rewriting their entire history of the last 3 years in their heads. Every time they had rolled their eyes at my little projects, every time they had apologized to neighbors for my lack of direction, I had been building a case that was now dismantling their social circle. My father ran a hand through his hair. I didn't know. Why didn't you say anything?" I tried. I said, "I tried to tell you I had a contract with the state. You asked me if it paid as much as Harper's bonus. When I said no, you stopped listening." Outside the kitchen window, the murmur of the party had turned into a buzzing hive. People were on their phones. I could see Logan, my young cousin, standing near the patio door with a group of millennials. He was holding his phone up, scrolling frantically. I walked over to the sliding door and cracked it open just an inch. "Dude, look at this," Logan was saying. "I just searched her name on LinkedIn. Not the profile she shows us, but the tagged posts. Look at this article from Financial Compliance Weekly." He read aloud, his voice full of awe. "The Invisible Auditor, How One Analyst's Algorithm Exposed the Midwest Pension Scandal." It mentions a G. West as the lead architect, one of Harper's friends. The girl who thought I read horoscopes peered over his shoulder. "Wait, that is Gianna." The girl who was carrying the napkins. Logan kept scrolling. "She is listed as a verified vendor for the State Attorney General's office." Holy cow. She isn't unemployed. She is a narc, but like a high-level narc. I closed the door. I turned back to my parents. They had heard it too. The narrative was shifting. I wasn't the failure anymore. I was something more dangerous. I was the one who knew where the bodies were buried. Suddenly, the door from the hallway swung open. Harper stood there. She looked wrecked. Her perfect hair was coming undone, and she had wiped off her lipstick, leaving her mouth pale and vulnerable. She had been listening. "You knew," she said. It wasn't a question. I turned to face her. Yes, she walked into the kitchen, her heels clicking on the tile. She stopped 3 feet away from me. "I remember," she said, her voice hollow. 3 months ago, you came into my room while I was packing for the Bahamas with Tyler. You asked me if I had seen the loan agreements for the foundation. You asked me if I knew why the incorporation papers were filed in the Cayman Islands. I nodded, and you told me that Tyler handled the finance and I should stick to folding my laundry. Harper flinched. She wrapped her arms around herself. I thought you were jealous. I thought you were trying to pick holes in him because he was successful, and you were you. She looked at me. Really looked at me. For the first time in years. You let me walk into this, she whispered. You let me plan a wedding to a criminal. I didn't let you do anything. Harper, I said firmly, I sent you the articles about predatory lending. I left the consumer complaint summaries on the kitchen counter. You threw them away. You said they were negative energy. I took a step closer to her. And about tonight, I didn't plan this for your engagement party. The subpoena was issued last week. The timeline was set by the state, not me. Then why are they here now? Harper cried. Why tonight? Because Tyler has been dodging the process servers for 10 days. I said, he hasn't been at his office. He hasn't been at his apartment. He's been hiding out at country clubs and private venues. I paused, letting the weight of the truth settle on her shoulders. When Kendall, the investigator, called me yesterday, she said they were going to raid his office on Monday. But they were afraid he would flee the country over the weekend if he got tipped off. She needed to serve him and seize his devices before he got on a plane. She asked me if I knew where he would be tonight. My parents were staring at me with their mouths open. And you told them to come here, my mother whispered. To your sister's party, I told them he would be at a specific address at 8 o'clock. I said, I told them he would be distracted. I told them it was the one place he felt safe because he thought everyone here was too enamored with his money to ask questions. I looked at Harper. I didn't do it to hurt you. Harper, I did it because if he married you, your name would be on those tax returns next year. And then it wouldn't be just him in that interrogation room. It would be you. Harper closed her eyes. A tear leaked out. But the house, she murmured. The deed. The trust. Why did you drop that bomb tonight too? Because you put me in the garage. I said simply. The room went silent. The absurdity of it hung in the air. The garage? It seemed so small compared to federal fraud charges. But it was the catalyst for everything. I could have stopped Rowan. I admitted. I could have told the lawyers to wait until Monday to enforce the trust. I was going to wait. I was going to let you have your night. Let Tyler get arrested. And then deal with the house quietly next week. I looked at my father, then my mother. But then you made me sleep on the floor. You made me feel like I was dirt in my own home. And I realized something. You were never going to respect me. You were never going to see me. As long as I kept cleaning up your messes in secret, you were going to treat me like the maid. I walked over to the counter and poured myself a glass of water from the tap. My hand was steady. Whether you think I am unemployed or not doesn't change what I have been doing for the last 3 years, I said, taking a sip. My bank account looks the same whether you believe in it or not. My company exists whether you understand it or not. I set the glass down. The only thing that changes tonight is how guilty you feel about not asking. My father looked down at his shoes. He looked ashamed. Not just embarrassed, but deeply, profoundly ashamed. He realized he had been bragging about a criminal son-in-law while treating the daughter who saved his house like a servant. Harper walked over to the table. She pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. She picked up a napkin, one of the ones I had spent hours stamping with gold foil. Harper and Tyler, a forever kind of love. She stared at the gold letters. He used my account, she whispered. The investigator asked me about the transfers. He told me it was for the venue deposit. He moved $45,000 through my name. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with fear. Am I going to jail? Gianna. I looked at her. I saw the little sister I used to protect on the playground. The sister I had stepped back for, time and time again, so she could shine. No, I said, you are not going to jail. How do you know? She asked. Because I gave the investigator the chat logs where Tyler instructed you to sign the transfers. I said, I have the emails where he lied to you about the tax implications. I gave them everything they need to prove you were a useful idiot, not a co-conspirator. Harper flinched at the term useful idiot, but she didn't argue. She knew it was true. Have you already given them that? She asked. Months ago. I said, I have been building your defense file since the day you got engaged. Just in case. My mother let out a sob and covered her mouth. She looked at me with something that might have been awe, Or maybe just shock. You saved her, my mother whispered. I shrugged. I did my job. The kitchen door swung open again. It was Rowan. He looked apologetic, but firm. Gianna, he said, Detective Miller needs a statement from you regarding the timeline of the tip, and Tyler is asking for you. He is asking for me, I asked. He is screaming that you are a disgruntled family member who framed him, Rowan said with a dry smile. Miller wants you to come in and clarify the relationship so they can put that theory to bed. I nodded. I smoothed down my dress. I will be right there. I turned back to my family. They looked like statues in a museum of ruins. I have to go finish this, I said. I started to walk away, but Harper's voice stopped me. Gee. I turned. Thank you, she said. It was barely a whisper, and I'm sorry. About the garage. I looked at her. I saw the wreckage of her perfect night, the ruin of her engagement, and the terrifying reality of her future crashing down on her. And I saw that she finally, truly saw me. I smiled. It was a small, sad smile. It is okay. Harper, it is a nice garage. Dad keeps it very clean. I walked out of the kitchen, leaving them alone with the cake and the truth. I had work to do. The party did not end with a bang. There was no sudden explosion, no dramatic clearing of the room. It ended with a slow, agonizing whimper. After the police officers finished their initial questioning and escorted Tyler and his father out to the unmarked cars for further voluntary discussion, legal speak, for we are taking you in before you shred any more documents. The atmosphere in the backyard shifted from confusion to a desperate need for exit strategies. The DJ, a perceptive man who realized he was not getting paid for overtime, simply cut the music. 1 second, a soft jazz ballad was playing. The next, there was only the sound of crickets and the distant murmur of scandalized whispers. I watched from the kitchen window as the guests evaporated. It was a masterclass in social awkwardness. People were mumbling excuses to my parents, clutching their purses tight, avoiding eye contact with the she said yes backdrop that was now flapping sadly in the night breeze. We will call you, they said. Let's catch up when things settle down. They promised. So sorry about the confusion. They lied. Within 20 minutes, the yard was empty. The fairy lights were still twinkling, casting their expensive glow over abandoned wine glasses, half-eaten shrimp skewers, and the wreckage of my sister's social standing. I turned away from the window and walked over to the sink. It was a reflex, I suppose. The party was over, the staff had fled, the mess remained, and for 29 years, I had been the one who cleaned up the mess. I turned on the hot water. I squeezed a dollop of dish soap onto a sponge. I picked up a crystal flute, one of the few that hadn't been shattered or stolen, and began to scrub. The rhythm of it was soothing. Wash, rinse, dry. It was the same thing I had been doing 24 hours ago, back when I was just the unemployed sister. But the air in the kitchen felt different now. It was heavier, charged with the static electricity of shattered illusions. I heard the click of heels on the tile behind me. I didn't turn around. I knew who it was. Harper walked into the kitchen. She looked like a painting that had been left out in the rain. Her hair, usually sprayed into an indestructible helmet of perfection, was loose and stringy. Her makeup was smeared, dark streaks of mascara cutting jagged paths down her pale cheeks. Her white dress, the one she had spent 3 months tailoring, was stained with something dark near the hem, maybe wine, maybe dirt from the garden. She didn't say anything at first. She just walked over to the island and leaned against it, as if her legs could no longer support the weight of her own expectations. She watched me wash the glass. "You are washing dishes," she said. Her voice was raspy, stripped of its usual glossy sheen. "You just dismantled my entire life, humiliated my fiancé, and seized the house, and now you are washing dishes." I rinsed the glass under the steaming water. "Someone has to," I said calmly. The catering staff left before they cleared the dessert station. "If the sugar sits on the crystal overnight, it gets sticky." Harper let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Sticky. Right. We would not want things to be sticky. She reached out and picked up a towel. For a moment, I thought she was going to throw it at me. Instead, she picked up a wet glass from the drying rack and started to dry it. Her movements were jerky, uncoordinated. She wasn't used to this. She was used to being the one who inspected the glass, not the one who polished it. We stood there in silence for a long time, just the sound of water and the squeak of cloth on glass between us. It was a perverse mirror image of the morning. Two sisters in a kitchen, but the power dynamic had flipped so completely that the room felt upside down. I worked so hard. Harper whispered. She wasn't talking to me. She was talking to the drain. I did everything right. I got the degree. I got the job. I worked 80-hour weeks. I found the guy who looked perfect on paper. She scrubbed the glass harder, risking breaking it. I was the winner. Gianna, that was the deal. I was the winner. And you were the project. I turned off the faucet. The silence that rushed in was deafening. Is that how you saw me? I asked, turning to face her. As a project. Harper looked up. Her eyes were red and raw. No, she said, her voice trembling. I saw you as the baseline. The baseline. Yes, she cried, slamming the glass down on the counter. You were the baseline I measured myself against every time I got a promotion. I looked at you to make sure you hadn't. Every time Tyler bought me jewelry, I looked at your empty hands to make sure mine were fuller. Tears spilled over again, tracking through the mascara smudges. I needed to be better than you. Gianna, it wasn't enough to just be successful. I needed you to be failing, because if you were failing, then my success meant something. It meant I was special. It meant I was the chosen one. She slumped against the counter, sliding down until she was sitting on the cold tile floor, her white dress pooling around her like a deflated parachute. And now, she choked out, now I find out you own the house. You have millions in the bank. You are some kind of secret corporate hunter. And Tyler, the man I thought was my prize, is a fraud. She looked up at me, her face twisted in agony. I have nothing. Gee, I am 27 years old, and I have nothing. I am the girl who got engaged to a criminal in her sister's house. I am the joke. I leaned against the sink, drying my hands on my apron. I looked down at her. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel the rush of victory I thought I would feel. I just felt sad. You don't have nothing. Harper, I said gently, you have a job. You have your health. You have a brain. Even if you haven't been using it lately. Harper shook her head violently. It is not the same. I built my identity on being the successful one. Who am I if I am not the one winning? I walked over and sat down on the floor next to her. The sequins of her dress scratched against my arm. You know, I said softly, when you told me to sleep in the garage last night, I kept asking myself why. Why was it so important to you? There were other options. We could have moved furniture. I could have slept on the couch. I looked at her profile. But you were adamant. You needed me in the garage. Harper looked away, staring at the oven door. And then I realized. I continued. You didn't just want to be successful. Harper, you needed me to be in the garage so you could feel like the one upstairs. You needed the physical separation. You needed to put me in the dirt so you could feel like you were in the clouds. Harper was silent. Her breathing was hitching, shallow gasps of air. I asked you a question earlier. I said, but I want you to really answer it now. No cameras, no guests, just us. I waited until she looked at me. If the police hadn't come tonight, if Rowan hadn't walked through that door with the deed, if I had just stayed quiet and let you have your party, would you have been okay with it? Harper blinked, a fresh tear sliding down her nose. Would you have been okay knowing I was sleeping next to the lawnmower while you drank champagne 20 feet away? Would you have slept soundly in my bed? The kitchen hummed. The refrigerator kicked on. Harper opened her mouth to lie. I saw it. I saw the instinct to say no. Of course not. I would have felt terrible. But then she looked at me, really looked at me, and saw that I knew everything. She saw that the time for lies was over. She closed her mouth. She swallowed hard. Probably, she whispered. The word hung in the air, heavy and ugly. Why, I asked. Because she said, her voice barely audible, because it made me feel safe. Safe. If you were in the garage, she said, her voice gaining a little strength. It meant the world made sense. It meant the hierarchy was intact. It meant I hadn't made a mistake by choosing the life I chose. If you were struggling, then my sacrifices were worth it. But if you were okay, if you were happy with less, or God forbid, if you were actually doing better than me, then what was I running for? She covered her face with her hands. It made me feel safe to know you were beneath me. Gianna. God. That sounds evil. It is not evil, I said. It is human, but it is also incredibly sad. I stood up. My knees popped. I walked over to the fridge and pulled out a bottle of water. I handed it to her. She took it, her hands shaking. So, here is the reality. I said, I own this house. I didn't buy it to trap you. I bought it because Nana asked me to protect it. She knew Dad was reckless with money. She knew you were reckless with status. She knew that if the title was in your name, Tyler would have talked you into leveraging it for one of his schemes within 6 months. Harper looked down at the water bottle. You think he would have made me mortgage the house? I think he would have convinced you it was an investment, I said, and you would have signed the papers because you are terrified of saying no to him. You are terrified that if you stop being the perfect, supportive fiancé, he will leave you for someone shinier. I leaned against the counter again. I saved the house. Harper, I protected the one thing this family actually owns, but I am drawing a line. Harper looked up. A line I am not going to use my resources to subsidize a lie. I said, if you stay with Tyler, if you try to spin this, if you try to stand by him and pretend this is all a misunderstanding, then you are on your own. I won't pay for your lawyers. I won't let you use this house for your press conferences. I won't be the safety net you fall into when he finally drags you down. Harper flinched. You want me to leave him tonight? I want you to look at the facts. I said, he lied to you. He stole from children. He used your bank account to launder money. He is not a victim. Harper, he is a predator. And he saw you coming a mile away. Harper squeezed the plastic bottle. The sound crinkled loudly in the quiet room. But if I leave him, she whispered, I have to call everyone. I have to return the gifts. I have to tell people I was wrong. I have to be the girl who got dumped at the altar. Basically, it is humiliating. Is it more humiliating than visiting him in prison? I asked. She didn't answer. I have money. Harper, I said, I haven't said that out loud to anyone in this family, but I am saying it to you. I have done very well for myself. Lantern Line had a revenue of $2 million last year. Harper's jaw dropped. $2 million, I nodded. I have resources. If you walk away from him, if you decide to actually rebuild your life on something real, I can help you. I can help you with a down payment on a condo. I can help you take a sabbatical from that job that is clearly killing you. I can help you find out who you are when you aren't trying to be Harper the Star. I stepped closer to her, but I am not giving a dime to Tyler Grant's fiancé. I am offering it to my sister. Harper stared at me. Her brain was trying to process the shift in gravity. The sister she pitied was offering to bail her out. The sister she mocked was the only one offering her a lifeline that didn't come with strings attached to a criminal enterprise. She looked down at her dress again. The sequins sparkled under the harsh kitchen lights. It was a dress made for a spotlight, but now she was sitting on a dirty floor. She started to cry again. But this time, it wasn't the hysterical sobbing of a ruined bride. It was the quiet, grieving weeping of someone who was mourning a version of themselves that had died. She looked around the kitchen, the dirty plates, the empty bottles, the remnants of the party she had killed herself to create. It looks so stupid now, she whispered, touching the sequins on her skirt. All of this, the dress, the flowers, it all looks like a costume. It was a costume. I said. She took a deep breath. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing the mascara even more. She looked like a raccoon. She looked like a mess. She looked more real than she had in 10 years. I don't know if I can do it. Gee, she said, I don't know how to be alone. I have been Harper and Tyler for 4 years. I don't know who I am without the and. That is the best part. I said, you get to find out. And trust me, the person you find might actually be someone you like, not just someone you think other people like. She nodded slowly. She didn't say yes. She didn't promise anything, but she didn't argue. She stood up. Her legs were shaky. She braced herself against the counter. I need to go upstairs, she said. I need to get out of this dress. It feels like it is suffocating me. She walked toward the door, her heels clicking a slow, mournful rhythm. She stopped at the threshold. She didn't turn around, but she paused. Gianna, she asked. Yeah. If I walk away from him, she started. Her voice barely a whisper. If I really do it, if I become the sister who failed, will you still answer my calls? I looked at her back. I looked at the slumped shoulders that had carried so much unnecessary weight. That depends, I said. She stiffened. Depends on what? Are you calling as the sister who put me in the garage? I asked. Or are you calling as the one who finally saw me? Harper stood there for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached up and unclasped the diamond necklace Tyler had given her that morning. She held it in her hand for a second, then set it down on the kitchen counter. It made a small, sharp click. She didn't say anything. She just walked out of the room, leaving the diamonds next to the dirty dishes. I stood in the silence of the kitchen, looking at the necklace. It was worth more than my car, but lying there on the formica, it just looked like a cold, hard stone. I turned back to the sink. There were still glasses to wash, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't mind doing them. The water felt warm, the house was quiet, and the garage door was closed. The blue and red lights of the unmarked police cars reflected off the front windows of the house, casting a rhythmic, pulsating glow across the lawn. It looked like a heartbeat, or perhaps a warning beacon. I stood on the porch steps, my arms crossed against the chill. The driveway, which had been filled with luxury SUVs just a few hours ago, was now the stage for a very different kind of exit. Detective Miller held the back door of his sedan open. Tyler Grant walked toward it. He wasn't in handcuffs, not yet, but the way he carried himself suggested he felt the weight of them already. His posture, usually so upright and arrogant, had collapsed. He looked small. Greg Grant followed, arguing loudly into a cell phone that I suspected no one was answering on a Saturday night. Wait, Tyler shouted, stopping just before he ducked into the car. He turned back toward the house, his eyes scanning the small group of us remaining on the porch until they landed on Harper. Harper, tell them this is a mistake. You know the business is legitimate. We are partners, remember? Harper stood next to me. She was still wearing the white dress, though the hem was stained with dirt from the garden. She looked at Tyler, really looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't see adoration in her eyes. I saw clarity. She reached into the pocket of her dress. She pulled out the velvet box. She hadn't been wearing the ring since she took it off in the kitchen, but now she held the box in her palm like it was a grenade. I am not your partner. Tyler, she said. Her voice was shaking, vibrating with the aftershocks of the night, but the words were clear. She walked down the steps, stopping 5 feet away from him. I am not going to marry a man whose business model depends on lies, she said. And I am certainly not going to marry a man who thinks it is okay to steal from kids who just wanted to go to college. But the wedding, Tyler stammered, desperation creeping into his voice. The deposits. We have the venue booked. I would rather be the sister who called off her engagement than the wife who helped ruin people's lives, she said. She tossed the velvet box toward him. It hit his chest with a soft thud and fell to the asphalt. He didn't try to catch it. Goodbye, Tyler. She turned around and walked back up the steps. She didn't run. She didn't cry. She just walked away from the future she had spent 4 years building, leaving it on the driveway next to a police car. As the cars pulled away, taking the noise and the chaos with them, the silence that settled over the porch was heavy. My parents were standing by the door. My mother, Elaine, looked like she was in physical pain. My father, Richard, was rubbing his temples as if trying to massage away the reality of the evening. Well, my mother whispered, looking at the empty street. That is it. The Grants are gone. The party is ruined. She looked at me, her eyes filling with a familiar mix of blame and martyrdom. I hope you are happy. Gianna, you let this happen. You could have warned us quietly. You could have handled this without blowing up the world in the middle of the engagement party. I looked at her. Old habits die hard. Even now, standing in the wreckage of a fraud investigation. She wanted to blame the messenger. Tonight didn't ruin anything. Mom, I said, it just refused to keep pretending. Rowan Pierce cleared his throat. He was standing by the railing, holding the final document. He looked out of place in the domestic drama, a beacon of legal reality. Director West, he said, the addendum. I walked over to the small table on the porch where my father had left his wineglass. Rowan laid the paper down. This is the occupancy agreement. I said to my parents, I signed it 10 minutes ago. I pointed to the signature line at the bottom. It guarantees you the right to live here for the rest of your lives. I am not kicking you out. I am not selling the house out from under you. My father looked at the paper. He looked at me. His eyes were wet, but he asked. He knew there was a but from now on, I said, tapping the paper, the title stays with me. If you want to host an event, you ask me. If you want to make a renovation, you ask me. And if you ever try to use this property as collateral for a loan or a scheme again, the agreement is void. I looked at them both, and nobody tells me where to sleep, ever again. My father picked up the pen. His hand shook, but he signed. My mother followed, sniffing loudly as she scratched her name onto the line. It is done, Rowan said. He took the paper, folded it, and placed it in his briefcase. He gave me a nod. I will file this on Monday. Good night, Gianna. Good night, Rowan. He walked down the steps and to his car, leaving us alone. I felt a hand on my arm. I turned to see Great Aunt May. She was 80 years old, a woman who had spent most of the party sitting quietly in the corner, nursing a single gin and tonic. She was the only relative who hadn't asked me why I was unemployed. Come here, girl, she crooned, pulling me toward the side of the porch, away from my parents. She looked at me with eyes that were cloudy with age but sharp with intelligence. You know, she said, her voice sounding like dry leaves rustling together. I watched you tonight. I watched you all these years. They spent years seeing you as the story they needed, not the person you are. They needed a failure so they could feel like successes. She patted my cheek. Her hand was cold. Tonight, you turned the lights on, and cockroaches hate the light, honey, but it is the only way to clean the house. She smiled, a wicked little grin, and then wandered back inside to find her purse. I walked down the steps and around the side of the house to the garage. The door was still open. The motion sensor light flickered on as I approached. I stood at the threshold, looking in. It was just a garage, concrete floor, oil stains, my father's Mustang gleaming under a tarp, and there, in the corner, the pathetic little air mattress with its tangled sheets. It looked so small now. The monster in the closet turned out to be just a pile of laundry. I walked in. I grabbed the plug of the air mattress and yanked it out. The bed hissed as it began to deflate, a long, sighing sound of surrender. I wasn't going to sleep here, not tonight, not ever again. But I wasn't going to abandon it either. I looked at the space. It was quiet. It was detached. It was private. I am going to put a desk here. I thought, right there, by the window. I'm going to clear out the junk, paint the walls, and put in a high-speed server rack. When I come home to visit, if I come home to visit, this won't be the place where they hide me. It will be the place where I work, my command center, Gianna. I turned. Harper was standing in the driveway. She had changed out of her dress. She was wearing a pair of old sweatpants and a t-shirt she must have dug out of a donation bin. She looked like she was 16 again. Hey, I said. She hugged her arms around herself. I don't think I can stay in the house tonight, she said. Mom is crying in the kitchen. Dad is staring at the wall. It is too much. She looked at me, hesitant. I am going to need a place to crash for a few days while I figure things out. I need to find a lawyer. I don't know. Unpack my life. She looked at the garage. I'm not asking for your room, she said quickly. I know I lost that right. But maybe not the garage. I looked at her. I saw the fear in her eyes. She was waiting for me to punish her. She was waiting for me to say, no, you sleep on the floor. See how it feels. But that wasn't who I was. That was who they were. We will talk upstairs. I said, there is a pull-out couch in the den. It is comfortable. Harper let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for hours. Thank you. Gee. She walked past me, heading toward the back door. As she passed, she reached out and squeezed my hand. Just for a second, but it was enough. I followed her out of the garage. I hit the button on the wall. The heavy metal door rattled and began to slide down, sealing away the oil stains and the deflated mattress. My parents were waiting for me at the back door. They looked smaller than I remembered. Without the armor of their pride, without the reflected glory of Harper's success, they were just two aging people standing in a kitchen that no longer belonged to them. Gianna, my mother said, her voice trembling. You are leaving. I picked up my purse from the counter. I am going back to the city. Mom, I have a briefing in the morning. But my father started. Are you coming back? Don't cut us off. Gianna, please. We are family. I paused at the door. I looked at the photos on the mantel, the ones where I was on the edge, the ones where I was blurry. I am not cutting anyone off. Dad, I said, I will be back to check on the house next month. I opened the door. I am just done living like I need your version of me to be real. I walked out into the night. My car was waiting in the driveway. It wasn't a luxury SUV. It was a sensible sedan with high safety ratings. I got in and started the engine. It purred to life, reliable and steady. As I backed out of the driveway, my phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I glanced at it. A message from Detective Miller Goodwork. We secured the devices. He is talking. A message from Rowan, all signed. The deed is recorded. Get some sleep. Boss. And one more. From Harper. Thank you for picking up when I finally called. I smiled. I turned onto the main road, leaving Maple Ridge behind me in the rearview mirror. The streetlights blurred into streaks of gold as I picked up speed. The call that mattered most wasn't the one I made last night to the investigators. It wasn't the one I made to the lawyers. It is the ones they choose to make from now on. I drove into the darkness, but for the first time in my life, the road ahead was perfectly, beautifully clear. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to hear from you. Please comment below and tell me where you are listening from, what you thought of Gianna's revenge, and if you've ever had a garage moment with your own family. Don't forget to subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button so this story can reach even more people.